Hi, for Cybersecurity Studios near Washington, D.C., I'm Dave Gardy for this special presentation, this hybrid web conference and webcast, CMC Impact on GovCon Part 2. Now, this was originally a live event in person that then became an event that was partially here, going to be shot in our studio and remote, and then now it's all remote with participants coming in via Zoom conference. And we're having issues with congestion on the East Coast. Both Zoom and Skype are somewhat stuttering, which is why my motions and video isn't as smooth, but we think our audio is coming through, so we're going to go ahead with this. Again, we have a conference here of several panels. It's on the Zoom conference, and we're taking that stream and sending that out to the 800 or so people that have signed up to watch the stream on a separate webcast. They don't have direct interactivity like the panelists do, but they will have the ability to send in questions, and we will try to take as many questions as we can. But if we don't get to all of them, we'll make sure the presenters get the questions. And that's the existing housekeeping for today, just so you know what's going on. We have 4 panels. The first panel, CMMC, A Legal Lay of the Land, from 11 to 11:45. From 11:50 to 12:30 is Updates from the Front Line, CMCC briefing with Katie Arrington. And then from 12:35 to 1:15, the industry panel, Industry Update, Acquisition and Implementation, a panel hosted by Terry Roberts. And finally, the CMMC AB, Where Are We with These Things? And of course, that's the board that's going to determine the accreditation. And that's going to be hosted by, moderated by Eric Crucis. And we're going to go to Eric right now because he's the first panelist. But just want to let you know the entire webcast will discuss today the inherent issues of implementing the program with COVID-19, a timeline of what to expect with updates, industry perspective and shifting priorities related to security, updates and developments from the CMCC Accreditation Body, CMMC AB. Got a lot of C's in there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Again, we're experiencing on the East Coast, especially Zoom and Skype, which we tried. We were going to try that. It's not any better. So please bear with us. And we're going to hope the audio comes through. We're getting feedback on our tech support line. If you have support issues, there's a support link underneath the video player on the lower left side. From that point on, I guess I'm going to send it over to Eric for the first panel, Legal Lay of the Land. Eric?
Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate it, and it's wonderful to be here today. I wish we could be in person again, but circumstances, of course, have dictated that we're better being separated and doing Zoom our homes or wherever we're working. It's my pleasure to not just kind of start off with a great panel, our events today, but to introduce the 2 panelists who are going to be speaking to you in the first panel. First is Norma Graham. She is the Vice President and Chair of the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Practice Group at Is Cui Associates, excuse me. She's a recognized expert in cybersecurity and data privacy. She started one of the first ever cyber practices at an AM 100 law firm in 2005. And I can tell you that it was hard to get people serious about cybersecurity back in 2005. So that's an accomplishment right there. She brings expertise to help defense industrial-based companies and help them understand accepted practices. She was really recently named to Washington Post top list of top outside cybersecurity experts. Norma, thank you for joining us. And I'm now going to introduce Mary Beth Bosco. She's a partner in Holland & Knight's DC office. I have a pleasure, like with Norma, to call her my friend and also my colleague. She has a lot of experience, a few decades of experience practicing government contracts law and cybersecurity compliance. In fact, a significant part of her practice is compliance, especially in cybersecurity. She works on protests, internal investigations, congressional investigations. She's a regular writer and speaker on cybersecurity matters. And of course, my name is Eric Crucis. I'm also a partner at Holland & Knight in the Tyson's, Virginia office. And like Mary Beth, I'm a government contracts and litigation attorney. So thank you all for joining us. And we have a lot of ground to cover and not a lot of time to do it. So I'm going to dive right in to the content that we have today. In our preparation session, Norma, you mentioned you have some kind of breaking news or information that you heard about the memorandum of understanding between the Accreditation Board and DoD. So I was wondering if you could chat about that for a minute.
Sure. And first of all, thank you to everyone joining us today at home. We know that there are many challenges as you deal with the COVID just in your life and your family, and we're grateful that you're able to participate with us today. You know, one of the things I think that is important, and then I'll jump to the DoD piece, is we talk about the impacts of the pandemic and cybersecurity. It really is all about businesses having a business plan and how it impacts all of us. And as Dave said, when we started this event, even just having bandwidth issues for this event as we try and talk about hot topics you can keep your business going are things that we care about. So I don't want to steal Katie's Arrington, who will be after us, but we see great news that Ellen Lord had signed the MOU with the Accreditation Board last week. The Accreditation Board, and we'll hear from them later today, actually approved that. So we're happy to see that that process is going to be moving forward. We also know that just 2 days after the last event in January, the CMMC did put out their updated guidance as to what would be expected for companies. And even last week, there was just a quick update on that as well. So the CMMC is very active and is moving forward. I know we're really focused on how DoD will be implementing the CMMC, and that really means what contracts will be impacted this year. There's about 10 Pathfinder contracts that they'll be looking at, and there really is just a tremendous amount going on. Even as the Congress focuses on the pandemic, and we'll talk more about this later, supply chain issues, cybersecurity issues, funds for DoD, funds for the Homeland Security, and you know, all continue to flow. And what's really important, and we'll spend more time on later, is the cross-reference between companies who are both DIB companies and what we call critical infrastructure. Now, the Homeland Security is calling essential critical infrastructure workers, all tie in if there's a pandemic or traditional cybersecurity issues. So a lot going on. Let me stop there and hand it back to you.
Great, Norma. That's a great introduction. I think it would be helpful to kind of get a lay of the land on what the current requirements are for DoD contractors. And Mary Beth, I know in your vast experience in this area, you have experience helping contractors through those issues and what they need to comply with. So I was wondering if you could talk about, at least for DoD contractors to start, and then we'll move on to non-DoD contractors, what requirements they have right now.
Sure, thank you, Eric. One of the questions we hear all the time from our clients is, as they're rolling out CMMC, what should we be doing? And the answer is comply with the DFARS clause C12. And that means for DoD contractors, there are 3 basic requirements. You've got to, your system have to be compliant with NIST publication 800-171. You should have a system security plan in place, and to the extent you are not compliant with requirements of 800-171, you should have a plan of action for getting there. You need to also flow these clauses down to your subs. And finally, the probably largest or most controversial at the beginning requirement is that you are to report a breach within 72 hours of the occurrence. So those are the current DoD requirements. And just to pick up on something Norma said, how COVID and cyber relate. I know a lot of our government contracts are asking us about if they're going to be able to recover the extra costs that they've incurred during the shutdown, basically. And one of the things we're telling is, if you want a chance of recovery, make sure you are cyber compliant, because given the fact that we're all working from home, the first things the government's going to take a look at when they evaluate your claims for your extra cost caused by the pandemic. And I'll turn it back to Eric.
Great, thank you, Mary Beth. And do you find, you mentioned the DoD clause. I've heard from clients and the compliance with 800-171 in the DoD clause. I've heard from some clients, one of the more difficult things to comply with, and that is the creation of a system security plan. I was wondering if you could just kind of give a brief overview of the idea behind a system security plan and and what contractors should be thinking about with that?
Sure. It's really the heart of your program. So again, this is advice we give clients all the time, and they laugh at us and say, you know, easier said than done, but you should know where the data that is government data, whether it be DoD or a civilian agency, resides in your system. So the first thing that's in a system security plan is a map of your of your IP systems, your IT systems, and where and how they connect to the outside world. If you know where government information resides on your system, it makes it much easier when there's a suspected breach to understand whether or not the breach affected government information. The second large part of the SSP is of the NIST 181, 171, excuse me, 800, 171 requirements to what you do. And again, to the extent that you do not comply with 800, 171, a plan, a schedule, assignments, who's going to do it, get you up to speed. So those are the two main components where everything is located in your system. If you can possibly wall off or keep separately DoD data, that makes it much easier. And also a mapping 800, 171.
Eric.
Yep.
Just one point to build on, based on how Mary Beth talked about these issues. You know, these are critical issues, but I think what is important for the DIB world and just people who are worrying about how to address CMMC, the concepts that Mary Beth was talking about are critical, and they've honestly been around in the marketplace for our sectors for about 10 years. If in the banking industry, this started many years ago, the concept of knowing where's your data, what is it connected to, what does it mean, and how do you protect it, are really very foundational issues. And I know that a lot of people are struggling with that, as you and Mary Beth said, but it is important for people to understand that that's a foundation. You know, the Department of Defense and other agencies, and even your customers, are expecting that companies are doing this already. We know it's hard, but it's just critical. It has to be done.
That's a really good point, and you know, I think it seems like the government has said there's really no choice. If you want to do business with us, you have to meet these basic tests, and that's what CMMC is all about. Norma, just let's just stay with you for a minute here, if you don't mind. I know you're very involved in what's going on in Capitol Hill and the executive branch and all the different machinations on cybersecurity initiatives within the government that gets passed on, the recommendations that get passed on to industry. One of those things is the Cyber Solarium Commission. I was wondering if you could talk about what they are and what kind of report they issued in the last couple of weeks.
Sure. Thank you for that. You know, as people think about some of these issues, I know when we talk about mission reports and things, people tend not to take those seriously, but the Congress did create something called the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. The reason that it's important that it includes sitting members of Congress, existing executive branch agencies, including the Department of Defense, TNI, DHS, right, the alphabet soup on the security side. And what they've done is they've issued a report that focuses on some very actionable items. There's 75 recommendations in that report that are really about protecting the United States and what they believe the critical infrastructure needs to do. And when I use that term, infrastructure, that covers all sectors. The defense industrial base is certainly one, but energy, transportation, and others. And many of the companies who are with us today, especially on the IT comm side, you're providing services across all those sectors. So the report does three main things. There's many more, but I'll just go through these and then stop. One, it calls on Congress to codify the definition of critical infrastructure and include language that would remind companies that they have a very specific responsibility to address cyber risk. Two, it actually specifically says that Congress should pass a law that gives direct liability to companies for not managing their cybersecurity risk. If they ship items, products, provide services where there are known cyber vulnerabilities, that there would be direct liability to companies for that. It also calls on the creation of a national cybersecurity certification and labeling authority. Again, for those of you in the IT sort of comm sector, but even much broader, that means there would be a federal government agency that would actually work with companies to put markings on products and services about what type of cybersecurity protections are in them. Now, that is a concept that we have seen in the European Union. But it is something that flows from a number of cybersecurity executive orders from the Trump administration and others about how to manage products and services to demonstrate both to the buyer of the service, whether it's government agency or consumers, what level of cyber protections are in there. And then that way people know what they're buying. And it also could help because ultimately when we worry about the cost of adding cybersecurity protections in, those are more expensive products. But if you can see a product that has a higher level of security and it's a little more expensive, certainly the federal government is saying that that's something that they care about and they're willing to pay. And I think so would other commercial customers.
That's great insight. I really appreciate it, Norma. Speaking of the cost of doing business with the federal government, which you kind of mentioned, recently there was a ban on certain Chinese companies doing business with the federal government, or I should say more broadly, providing products and services from certain Chinese companies to the federal government. Mary Beth, just asking, obviously this is something that could increase the cost of doing business with the federal government for contractors who have previously provided these products. But I was wondering if you can kind of give an overview of what that ban looks like and where it stands and what we should expect from it, what contractors should think about.
Sure. There, back in, I think, the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, we started seeing for the first time in the GovCon space the banning or limiting of use of products from specific companies. So 2018 was the Kaspersky ban. The 2019 NDAA Section 889, so you'll often hear this ban referred to as the 889 provision, said that government contractors can't sell to the government goods or services that are a substantial or essential part of what they are selling to the government that comes from either Huawei or ZTE. There's also a provision that talks about video surveillance equipment and adds some companies to that ban. It has been implemented in the FAR 52-205-25 is the clause that implements this. It again says that you can't provide the federal government products or services that include components or products from Huawei or ZTE or their subsidiaries, but it doesn't actually list out or define subsidiaries, which of course is going to make things harder for government contractors. The clause also requires companies to include in their SAM reps and certifications that they are complying with this regulation, and it's only going to get broader. In 2020, the ban, if you will be expanded to mean not just that you can't supply the government with these issues, but you can't even use them in the process of making your whatever services or products you're providing. So they're basically all gone. And Norma may talk about this a little bit in more depth. The NDAA also created something called the Federal Acquisition Security Council, and that council is charged with looking at products made overseas to determine whether there will be more companies added to these types of bans. So in terms of the future, you're going to have to look at your processes overall to see whether these components are in your system, and you're going to have to monitor the FASC website to see whether any other products will be added. If they are added, there will be a FAR clause that specifies which additional companies are banned. Thanks, Eric.
Maybe I think as the video has been a little bit slow as we've talked about, and we're waiting for it to come on. I'm not sure if he can hear us. One of the things I did want to just mention to build on what Mary Beth said is that it was the FY19 NDAA, and that was a good precursor to what I think people have been seeing since then. The White House issued the ICT Executive Order 13873. That really went much broader about working with entities like Huawei, ZTE, and others. The Commerce Department, the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, has been working on a rulemaking for quite some time to really try and give guidance to companies to understand what does it mean if you're in current contracts with some of the companies or countries of note. It's called the Entity List, to understand, what that means going forward for everyday commerce. There actually have been provisions like this in the law that were about, I'd say, 8 years ago, where for certain types of grants, Commerce Department, NASA, others, that if you were a government contractor, you had to work with the FBI to talk about the types of risks and the protections you have in your supply chain around cybersecurity. And ultimately, I think that's the biggest issue that we're seeing across the board. The FASC, as Mary Beth mentioned, is really an entity that is able to move quicker than the rulemaking will be. And they are looking at all government contracts, whether they are civilian or defense, and evaluating companies who are bidding on RFPs and other things, whether or not that the company itself is safe and secure. They have the ability to ban a company completely from participating in a procurement procedure, or even just from one particular one. So I think that there is a lot going on in the executive branch to try and look at these broader issues around countries of origin, but substantiated cybersecurity risks, and they all have to go together. But the clarity and transparency for the private sector on what that is and what they should look for is really important. So I'll turn it back to Eric.
Great, thank you so much, Norma. I lost my audio there for a minute, so I'm not sure if you picked up on that. But one thing I wanted to mention is that Katie Arrington, who's speaking a little bit later, I don't know if this came across before, has been deeply involved in this issue, so she may say a couple of things about it as well. So we look forward to really her comments on that. I want to come back on what contractors should look at, Mary Beth, as far as the non-DoD contractors. We talked about the DFARS clause and what that requires, but the non-DoD contractors have had somewhat more lax requirements to date. And I was wondering if you could just kind of speak to what those requirements are.
Sure. I think DoD, rightly so, has gotten all of the attention in terms of cyber requirements because they've been leading the league, if you will, with very specific requirements. But don't ignore your other civilian contracts, because many agencies have their own cyber requirements. The FAR, there is a FAR section on cyber, but it is not as detailed as DoD. It's really a performance spec. It just requires you, for example, to limit access to information to those who need it, just those who need it, but it doesn't tell you how to do that. It leaves that up to you. Probably, and Katie can probably talk about this a little bit more, when we're talking about CMC level 1, it's closer to the FAR than it certainly is to the DFAR current requirements, which will probably make up most of level 3 on the CMMC. But other agencies have their own requirements as well, and it's very important that you check your tracks. For example, the Department of Transportation and State require companies to notify those agencies when an employee who was working on state or transportation contracts and have access to their IT systems either leave the company or join the company. That's very different than any other requirement. If there are requirements for self-certification or third-party certification, one agency has that in place already. That's HHS. The IRS has an extremely stringent notification requirement. It's 1 hour from a suspected breach that you got to notify the agency. There are draft DHS, Department of Homeland Security regulations that have not yet become final. And GSA also has draft regulations. So it's quite in a state of flux, but I think what you can expect as CMMC rolls out at DoD, that the FAR Council and the civilian agencies will probably lag along, but eventually follow a very similar model.
This is Katie Arrington. Can I chime in there for a second?
Sure. Thank you.
Hey. So everybody, just in case, just to reference that, I sit on the FASC Council. I'm one of the 3, OMB is the chair. We have the 3 sub-chairs, that's DNI, DHS, and DOD. And one of the charters of the Federal Acquisition Security Council, which derived from the Secure Technology Act that was passed in 2018, actually signed into law December 20th, 2018. And this is to unify, our supply chain. That's a big one, right? And 889 is a part of that. There's, what we have in the DoD, we have special authorities, U.S. Code 10.2339 Alpha, which lets us, when you mentioned Kaspersky, that's how that happened. But the one main part of that is to unify those standards. So you can absolutely expect that federal agencies are going to letting us with the CMMC lead the charge, but they are absolutely looking to adopt the CMMC model as their own, as well as our international partners. And the one last thing I wanted to add, and Mary Beth, you were spot on, and Nicole, and 9B, to those people that are listening today, is probably more impact.
Did we lose Katie there for a minute? Oh, there we go.
Nope. The 889B is more important right now to businesses in the DoD environment than anything. If we do not get something moving on this quickly, it means that the Department of Defense can't contract with anybody who has Huawei, ZTE, or Height Vision in their work. So we really need, we have an industry day, a listening session in the beginning of March, but we would absolutely, please, if you're on this call and you belong to any of the triad associations, NDIA, AIA, PSC, reach out to make sure that your voice is heard with the legislators, that we need to have a plan in place to do this, because we don't want to hurt our small business partners nor our defense industrial base with the current way those DNB is laid out.
Great, thank you, Katie. That's very helpful. And please feel free to speak to that a little bit also in the next session as well. I think that's really great information, and really appreciate it. One thing I think that people struggle with, and I'm going to come back to you, Mary Beth, before we go to Norma for another question, but is this, and we already got a question about it actually today, is this 72-hour window of breach reporting. And I think some people are struggling with the fact that the DFARS clause and CMMC are 2 separate requirements that layer on top of each other. So I was wondering if you could just kind of talk to that, your expectation that the DFARS clause will be sticking around even though CMMC is here because they have different requirements.
Actually,
sure, absolutely.
Norma, can I we are actually in the process of the rule change. DFAR will actually speak directly to the CMMC. And that ruling is already in process and will become normal in of 2020, where the DFAR rule now says you'll be compliant to the NIST standard. It will actually say to the CMMC standard in your contract. And the rule updates, I believe we have to have the CMMC in all DoD contracts by FY25.
Great, and then that rule will still have that 72-hour requirement in it, I presume, or something similar.
Yes.
Eric?
Norma, I wanted to come back to you really briefly. And I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a lag, so if I'm talking over somebody. Norma, you came back from speaking at Davos a little while ago. Just kind of from a general sense, what do you see the international community looking at in the cybersecurity world? And what are other areas of the world speaking about? Before, of course, we got swamped with the pandemic. This was obviously something in the front of everyone's mind, and it still is. But what are you hearing around the world on cybersecurity compliance from, internationally?
Thank you for that. It's actually hard to imagine that was only 2 months ago. It really feels like 10 years ago based on everything that we've been going through. But I'd say three main important things that we spent a lot of time talking about at Davos around cybersecurity. And these are changes that I've seen just in doing this for 15 plus years. The first is that we're really seeing both leaders of countries around the world and key sectors talking about the nexus of cyber risk and digital innovation, right? For many years, we've had a very split discussion between cyber risk, which is something that somebody else was supposed to pay attention to, but digital innovation and technological revolutions were things that were cool and interesting, but they didn't need to go together. The second is that when we talk about cybersecurity risk around the world, public or private sectors, it's still in the top 10 risks for both level of severity, nearness of the potential, and the broader impact. And really the third issue, which as you mentioned in the beginning, when I started my practice in 2005, I keep evangelizing, we've been talking about the potential for a widespread cybersecurity attack that could impact critical infrastructure overall. And honestly, even just today, as we're dealing with being at home and the pandemic, just the challenges of basic bandwidth, IT, communication structures, are things that we all need to pay attention to, and the international community is seeing. Now, the last piece, while the U.S. has been working its way mostly sector by sector on cybersecurity issues, mandates, regulatory structures, public-private partnerships, most of the other countries around the world are starting to move to a regulatory structure, that there's a question as to whether or not voluntary compliance is sufficient if it's for what we call those lifeline sectors. And no one is ever excited about new regulations, but ultimately what we were talking about in Davos and around the world is the need to have the conversation, because we need to talk about potential for standardization across all sectors. I know we're focused on the DoD and the DIB world here in the US, but a lot of the companies who are in the DIB world are performing contracts, in the US and other sectors and around the globe. So what the private sector doesn't need is 55 different mandates, but what we do need to do is help talk about what does that standardization mean. At least at the end of the day, I think people are having a legitimate conversation about risk, and now we have to talk about how do we do it. And for some sectors who haven't seen any mandates for many years, while others have, that's a little bit of a hurry up. And I know that will be painful for people, but that's on the global stage, that's what they're seeing. I promise one last thing. The US has been doing a really good job about trying, when they're negotiating bilateral and multilateral agreements, to be including cybersecurity issues or IP protections, trying to push against the requirement for other countries, law enforcement, who have been pushing with law enforcement to be able to get into US companies' networks, IP protections. So I think we're trying to see, and hopefully that will help as we think about what could happen around the world.
Great, that's a wonderful overview. We're actually getting quite a bit of questions, as you can probably imagine. And I think some of those can be solved by kind of giving an overview. This is obviously about, the next few hours are about CMMC, but we think it's very helpful to kind of give an overview of what's out there. Mary Beth, I was wondering if you could kind of just give an overview of what CMMC is, about the 5 different levels, and just kind of a general few minutes on what people should expect with CMMC.
Sure, thanks, Eric. This will be brief, and then Katie in the next segment will delve into the details. But again, what this is about is trying to make uniform and subtle requirements imposed on DoD contractors, but also recognize that there are different activities going on, and some warrant more cyber protections than others. So what the basic structure of this program is that there are going to be 5 levels of cybersecurity, starting from 1 going up to 5, which is the most stringent. Level 3, as I said, will probably be very similar to the current 800-171 requirements. Most contracts will fall within level 3. The 4 and 5 levels will have additional requirements to those of 800-171 and will require more oversight from companies and also more robust policies and procedures, in the sense that they are just institutional, repeatable, across the board, across an organization structure, all offices, etc., uniform, to a certain extent, centralized, predictable, and capable of being carried out and repeated. The other thing you will hear about with CMMC is the fact that your company will need to have a third-party certification that states that your system complies with, let's say, level 3, in order to be awarded a contract that's designated as level 3. So I think by 2025, the goal is that all new DoD contracts coming out will be designated level 1 through 5. And that in order to be awarded the contract, you have to have a third-party certification that says you meet the requirements of that contract. Now, how are you going to get certified? We'll hear about that later as well. There has an accreditation board has been set up. That board will actually set up a program to train third-party certifiers, who will be, for the most part, private entities. Once those companies go through the training, they will be certified, if you will, to do third-party evaluations, and then they'll go out and be able to issue the required level certifications to DoD contractors. I think that's it in a nutshell.
Hey, Eric, I just wanted to add one piece. You know,
Sure.
for a lot of the companies that are watching today or just participating, I know that this is very difficult, and we've talked about this, and we're going to hear a lot more from Katie and the accreditation board as to how DoD plans to do it. But one of the things that I've been spending a fair amount of time on with companies is, if you're a company who are providing services across different sectors who already have very similar regulatory requirements, the better approach I would suggest to make your life easier as a company is to map out the regulatory requirements for the different sectors that you service. So if you're working with the energy industry, there's a number of requirements that have been in place for many years, and these are all almost the same that we're seeing in the DoD CMMC. If you work in the communication sector, if you work in the banking sector, even in transportation now, there's some very similar structures. So instead of everyone has to be compliant, period. No further discussion. And I know Katie will explain that. But in trying to run your business, if you can map out all the requirements across all the places that you're doing business, it's much easier to put a compliance program in place across the company. So you don't need 50 of them. You just need a consistent compliance program that meets the requirements. And honestly, for a lot of companies, you know, small or big, if you're doing it across all sectors, you'll most likely need to pick the most robust requirement and apply it across the board. I know some companies are thinking, I'm going to have a compliance program just for DOT, another just for DOE, just for NERC, just for Treasury, and that's really not a good use of your resources. So, you know, we can talk about that offline, or if companies are interested, but people should be thinking about it that way.
That's a great point. And Norma, I'm going to stay with you just for a minute here because these compliance programs are there to meet bad actors, essentially, who are looking to attack systems, to take things from systems, to alter systems, or just to look at systems. And I always use the analogy that if we didn't know who we were fighting the Nazis in World War II, among others, we wouldn't have done a very good job of fighting World War II. So we have to know who our enemy is. I was wondering if you could talk about kind of who are the significant cyber actors out there that are trying to attack contractors and the American companies writ large.
Sure. Yeah. World War II, we could talk about mutual deterrence in the nuclear age. I grew up in Connecticut, and they taught us to actually hide under our desks in the event that there would be a nuclear attack. I'm not sure that that would have helped us much. But for all companies, I think the bigger issue is you have to understand that there are a host of different attackers and they want different things, right? That's what Eric was talking about. These are nation states. We've talked a lot about those. They're what we call non-state actors. These are entities within some other countries that are being supported by that government, but plausible deniability if they work with those types of groups. There's hacktivists, and honestly, there's just criminals. There are countries like North Korea who have a very aggressive cybersecurity offensive, and that a lot of times is just to raise money because sanctions are hitting North Korea so hard. So attackers are looking for three things. They want to steal, they want to disrupt, and sometimes they want to destroy. Now, we haven't yet hit really that third category a lot in the US, and for that we are very thankful. But I think it's important for people to understand that from where you sit, you are an entity that's being attacked as we speak. And a comment I've heard from a lot of companies as we deal with their cyber risk is, the Russians don't care about my company. Well, I guess the good news for you is you're important enough that they do care. And whether or not they want to attack you personally or they want to get through your networks to other companies or to government, I think that that's really a big issue. There are some very sophisticated groups, and all they do all day long is attack the same sectors over and over. And really, I think the point of a lot of the CMMC and some of the other requirements, and even, cybersecurity information sharing, that's something across sectors that people really need to do. The point is that the attackers are using what we call the same tools, techniques, and procedures to attack everyone. The last thing that is really important that the attackers know, which we'd all strongly suggest that you deal with, they know how quickly you're updating your systems. They know if it takes 2 weeks, 2 months, or 6 months. And what they're doing is they're sitting in your networks right now while they know. You may think that making those updates is something you can do tomorrow or next week. But as soon as you are aware of a vulnerability, you really need to update your systems. Supply chain is really the last thing, and I know we talk a lot about that. Really, attackers are getting into your vendors, whether they're products or services, and you need to be very careful there. So at the end of the day, no one is safe. We don't say that to scare people. It just means we need to take the risk seriously. And, as Mary Beth and Eric and the rest of the team will talk about, really the goal of some of these requirements is to make everyone safer. And we can only do that together. That's a shared responsibility.
Great. And we do have a minute left. So Mary Beth, I just want to ask you one last thing before we have to go. One thing that is interesting that Norma mentioned is the fact that it doesn't matter kind of how small you are, how unimportant you feel. This is an issue where the cyber attackers are kind of looking out for you. And I wonder if you could kind of speak to, so a lot of times those smaller companies are subcontractors in the supply chain, and they're a few levels down. I wonder if you could speak to how, do subcontractors have to comply with the current DoD requirements, and will they have to be CMMC certified as well to do business up the supply chain with DoD?
The answer, Eric, to both questions is yes. Small businesses are not exempt either from the current DoD scheme or regulations, and they will not be exempt from CMMC going forward. As subcontractors, the extent to which they are covered may depend on the type of information that they have access to through their prime. So the prime contractors can assist small business contractors greatly if they are careful about separating out covered defense information. If the subs don't need it, don't give it to them. make things easier. Rightfully, small businesses are worried about the cost. DoD has said that they're going to pay for companies to upgrade their systems. And there are other ways, none of which are perfect, that some small businesses have been dealing with their primes to make sure that they are following the right cyber standards. So for example, some prime contractors will load a laptop that is only connected to the prime contractor's system. And therefore, the information on the prime's system always stays with the prime. It never goes to the subcontractor. And there are variations on that theme. Can the sub send their workers to the prime's facilities, et cetera? But I think it is important for the subs, no matter how small, to not be a weak link in this chain. While it happened to a large business, I think one of the scariest things to me is a few years back, one of the largest breaches that had occurred so far in the US, the bad actor came in through the HVAC system of the company. And I think that opened a lot of eyes about how vulnerable systems can be on all levels.
Great. Well, thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you, Norma. With that, we are out of time. I still have half my questions left to ask, but unfortunately, we have very exciting material to come up, and Katie Arrington's up next. But before that, I know we're going to send it over to Dave Gardy to take us out.
Thank you, Eric. Great panel. Thank you for both Mary Beth, also Norma and Eric. Did a great job there. We're going to go to Katie Arrington shortly, but before we do, we're going to go to a brief commercial sponsor from Tom Tollerton.
I cannot hear Dave.
Of DHG.
No, I can't either.
Hi, I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios near Washington, D.C. in preparation for the CMMC event that's taking place. And with us on the Skype right now from Charlotte, North Carolina is Managing Director of DHG, Mr. Tom Tollerton. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning.
Give us an overview. Who is DHG and what's the value proposition that they bring to the table?
Yeah, I appreciate it. DHG, Dixon Hughes Goodman, is the top 20 public accounting and advisory firm based in Charlotte. We have a very strong government contracting services group that focuses on providing government contractors, DoD contractors with financial audit, tax and advisory services. I sit in our IT advisory practice and focus on cybersecurity and data privacy compliance services. Again, we have a very strong government practice. We work with a lot of government contractors across the United States on a variety of issues and topics. And CMMC is really a hot button right now. And we look forward to helping contractors kind of navigate the waters around CMMC in the coming months.
How does DHG recommend preparing for CMMC certification?
Well, it always comes down to understanding the nature of the information, CUI, that you have and where it sits and who has access to it. That's always where we recommend clients start, getting an understanding of their system and the nature of data flows. And then from there, it's really a gap analysis against what the CMMC requirements are. Once you understand what your environment looks like, what your system looks like, you need to understand what control environment you have in place and where you're weak. And we've helped clients do that quite a bit in the past.
And how can DHG help me as a federal contractor prepare?
We've, in the past, helped contractors with those gap analyses that I've just mentioned with the NIST 800-171 framework that has existed, is the rule right now in the DFARS requirement. But moving forward, it's really important for contractors to understand where they sit with regard to the CMMC level that they anticipate they will need to achieve before CMMC becomes official and required in contracts. We've assisted clients with those gap analyses in the past. We also look forward to helping clients achieve certification moving forward once the accreditation program is official.
So if people want to find out more about DHG, where do they go on the web?
We're at dhg.com/IT advisory.
Thanks. We've been talking to Tom Tullerton, who is the Managing Director with DHG. Tom, thanks for joining us via Skype.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I'm Dave Gardy, and now we go back to the NeoSystems CMMC event. Okay, we're back at the CMMC Impact on GovCon 2, and we're going to redo the earlier attempts to have Katie Arrington when we had the Zoom conference congestion problem. So we've re-recorded it, and that's here now. I'm going to reintroduce her. Katie Arrington currently is the Chief Information Security Officer to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. In this position, she serves as the central hub and integrator within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment to align acquisition cyber strategy. And now we're going to go to Katie for her interview. Katie?
Hello, and thank you guys for actually having the patience to reschedule this so that we can have a much more calmer communication link. Mm-hmm. So as stated, I am Katie Arrington, CISO for acquisition here at the Department of Defense. And if you have paid attention to the other sessions that were previously on, I had briefly popped in on the discussion about supply chain with Mary Beth and Norma, and had made some comments there about 889B and where we were with the FASC. What I would like to do with this is bring you all up to speed with a 7-minute to 8-minute tutorial about the CMMC, and let you know how we're moving in the acquisition and sustainment community here in the DoD with the CMMC, and how that all interlinks to the things that have been discussed, the DFAR clause, Section 889B of the NDAA, and so on. So with no further ado, for those of you who are on this broadcast, if you've never heard of the CMMC, hi, my name is Katie, and welcome to my world. The CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. The DoD has been working with industry, academia for the past year to create this model. We created the model based off of some very, very amazing work that had been done previously by the NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. They had released many years ago, 2005, I think, the original special publication 800-53, which was how the DoD, the federal systems, needed to have protocols, requirements, processes to enact cybersecurity within our federal systems. In 2014, President Obama signed an executive order that created something called the NIST Special Publication 800-171. And this was how non-federal systems should impart cybersecurity requirements process. It was built on top of the 53 because that was for federal systems. The 171 was for non-federal systems. And along at that same time frame, we did something called, if you're not familiar, it's called the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, DFARS, as we like to call them. When the executive order from President Obama was signed, a DFAR rule was created. DFAR Rule 252.204.7012. And that said that if any contractor in the Department of Defense was touching controlled unclassified information, that they needed to self-attest that they were doing the 110 controls based in the NIST 171. Well, we all go out in the morning. I don't think anybody in the world wakes up and says, I want to fail today, or I want to be mediocre, or I don't want to do my best. And that kind of fell through with the 171. A lot of companies were unaware that they even had that in their contract, that those requirements were even out there. So as we move forward, and it was fully implemented in all defense contracts by 2017, we realized we had a major problem. We were losing about $600 billion a year to our adversaries in IP loss, data loss, and straight up cyber espionage. They were targeting our supply chain. They were taking out the most vulnerable companies that we had in our supply chain. And they're needed. They're more than needed. They're necessary. And we needed to figure out a way to help industry get ready, get certified, to actually do the work that they had signed on contracts that they could do. We don't want to lose any of you. You're way too important. So we had to figure out a way how to get us there. Secondarily, we needed to understand that one size does not fit all in security. That if you're, and it's no disrespect, I'm a very big fan of military boots, but if you're manufacturing boots, we don't need to have and pay for the same kind of security, cybersecurity, around what you're doing versus someone that may be doing hypersonics. So we needed to have a model that was based on maturity, based on capability, based on what we needed to protect, and a way that we could put our resources where it was really important. So we created the model. We based it on all of those standards, the NIST 53, NIST 171. We went out and took international standards, and we created a maturity model that is more about creating critical thinking skills around cybersecurity than actually making a checklist of things to do. We created a model with industry that was digestible for small businesses. The NIST is brilliant in what they created, but sometimes a small business may not understand when you talk about access controls, what that really means. Sometimes it comes off as Greek, and getting it translated to basic English is a little bit challenging. So we went ahead and did that in the model. And what we're intending to do is roll the CMMC out in 2020. We're on track to do that. We will release a few RFIs, about 10 of them, in the June timeframe. We'll take these contracts from the whole of the Department of Defense, DLA, Transcom, you name it. We're going to pull in a variety. And we're going to have auditors coming out of the training from the CMMC AB about the same time. So as we release the RFIs, we'll have the certified and trained auditors who will be able to go out to industry and certify companies at the level of maturity required for the work that they're bidding on. The DFAR that I mentioned, that 7012 DFAR, is in the process of a rule change. That will not be completed until about October of this year. So you will not see the CMMC in any Department of Defense contracts or RFPs until the rule change is completed. So in November, we will start seeing the CMMC requirements in certain RFPs. We understand this is a big cultural shift, and we want to ensure that we're doing everything we can to bring our small business partners right along with us. So we are working on different plans and strategies to help. One of them is that any of the contractors that are bidding on work does not need to have their CMMC certification until time of contract award. If it is not otherwise stated in a contract, the only CMMC level that will be required is CMMC level 1. And the primes most likely will have a different level of CMMC than most of the subs on their contracts, because the only time that we want to use CMMC 3, which is the full instantiation of the NIST 171, those 110 controls, is if the company is touching or transmitting controlled unclassified information. And let me just give the audience an understanding of how few companies that really is in the Department of Defense and our supply chain. When I say the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, I'm talking about 300,000 companies that supply our great nation with the most amazing national defense that the world has ever known. Out of that 300,000 companies, only about 15,000 of them are what we called cleared defense contractors. Those are ones who are transmitting or holding CUI. So there won't be very many. The bulk of companies will have to get CMMC level 1, which are 17 basic controls that cost nothing to impart. The cost of the assessment is estimated to be under $3,000. for the CMMC Level 1. Your certification for your company is good for the whole of DoD, for any DoD contract for 3 years. So we're talking about a very, very, very broad group that we're trying to engage with, the industrial base, 300,000 companies. But think of this, CMMC Level 3 is only about 15,000 companies, and CMMC Level 4 and 5 will be 0.06% of our industrial base. So most of you watching this broadcast just need to get the Level 1, which is simple things like access controls and passwords and making sure you have antivirus software on your computers and that you're actually updating them and you have a way to download patches if needed. With that being said, it's going to take us a while to implement. Because I can't, we've made security an allowable cost with the CMMC, we can't insert it into an active contract. And it's the same thing we went through when President Obama signed in the executive order in 2014. We have to go through an acquisition cycle. So most of our acquisition contract strategies are 1 base year plus 4 option years. So if you're on a contract today that is not due to come out for recompete for 3 years, you are not going to be required to get a CMMC certification if you're bidding only on that work for the next few years. But what I would say to industry is that don't wait. The CMMC model is out there now. It's very easy to read and understand and to get prepared. Waiting right now, if COVID-19 is any example of what the world will be. We're all teleworking. We're all doing our best to access our data, our databases, our enterprises remotely. We need to have good cyber hygiene in place to do that. Our adversaries are not taking a time out. They are diligently working. They know we're vulnerable right now. And we don't want to be this way forever. So we need you guys to get secure for not us, but for you. Keeping you in business, the basis of our industrial base, the small businesses, keeping you there is essential to our national security. We value quality, we value safety, and we're willing to pay for it in every DoD contract. Now, security is an allowable cost, and we are going to pay to ensure that you have the right cybersecurity practices, hygiene, protocol, process, and policy in place to secure your world and ours. With that, I do want to mention a few other things. In the panel before, we talked about 889B, NDAA, FY18, Section 889B. This is something that if you belong to an industrial association, NDIA, AIA, PSC, AFCEA, any of the MEPs, please reach out and let me explain what it is. In August of 2020, if any of our contractors in the Department of Defense, our industrial base, have Huawei, ZTE, or Height Vision video surveillance cameras or telecoms, we can no longer do business. So it is important that you reach out to your industry associations, you reach out to your legislator. We agree with the intent wholeheartedly on this effort, but we need to impart some risk mitigation strategies as we work to eliminate the reliance on those particular manufacturers of video surveillance equipment specifically out of our supply chain and bring it back home to the United States where, if COVID-19 hasn't shown us anything, that getting our own supply chain, making sure that we are taking care of home first is crucially important to our national defense. Along with that, I'll end on this one note. I also sit on the FASC, the Federal Acquisition Security Council. I represent the Department of Defense. The goal of this council, this Acquisition Security Council, is to set cyber standards, to set the same risk mitigation practices across the whole of government. So I can assure you that we are actively engaged with our other federal agencies bi-weekly about the CMMC to help usher them to make it a federal standard. We are also working with our international partners. Our Five Eyes partners have already leaned in, as most of them have cybersecurity requirements and policy. They are actively adopting the CMMC as their method to help their industrial bases become cyber secure. So please know this is not just a shot in the dark. This actually is a well-coordinated effort for the whole of government, the whole of our industrial base, to get some cybersecurity true metrics and auditability to make sure that you're prepared. With that, I will leave a few minutes left to answer some questions that you may have. I know there are a few from the prior session that we tried, but I'm more than welcome to answer any questions I possibly can.
Well, since we don't have anybody online and it's not live because we're recording this after the event, maybe you could tell me some of the more frequent questions you get, Katie, because that was an excellent presentation, and I'm sure there's questions you normally get after you give it.
Oh my gosh, so many. The first one is, will my prime put me out of business with the CMMC? Absolutely not. I'm sorry, is the feedback bad for you there?
No, it's fine.
Okay. The same small business requirements are going to be maintained throughout the life cycle of every contracting shop that we currently have. So what it is today, we've ensured that those requirements are in place. So no, a large business won't put a small business out of work by, changing the CMMC requirements. How are we going to ensure that the flow down of information, the flow down of CUI is appropriate from the prime to the sub? We have rewritten the DoD 5000 series, the instruction on how our program managers look at cybersecurity. We've implemented the CMMC for our acquisition community inside the department so that we can mirror it when we do our statements of work, when we write up our RFIs, we create our Section Cs and Section L. So we have retooled how we do acquisition when it comes to cybersecurity to mimic the CMMC for the DIB. Another question is, CUI, what is CUI? Well, the Department of Defense just reissued, updated the CUI policy. You can go to it on our websites. It's DoD instruction. If you Google it, it says DoD CUI. I can't remember the specific instruction. I think it's 8500, but one of the 8500 series, but I could be wrong. Another one of the other questions is, will I get reimbursed for my CMMC? Absolutely. We're working with OMB and OIRA right now to ensure that we have the costing built in, that we have cost realism into our bids as we go forward, because we are impacting the economy, we are impacting what the Department of Defense spends, but we have to think of what we're looking to invest in the CMMC certifications versus what we've lost in our industrial base. So $600 billion last year was lost. That breaks out to $4,000 per U.S. citizen after taxes. Imagine, fast forward to 2025, where quantum is a commercially available capability. And if you don't know what quantum computing is, don't worry about it. I didn't know either many, many years ago. But what it does is quantum breaks basic level encryption. So if you are encrypting commercially, more than likely you're doing it with basic encryption keys. And with quantum computing, our adversary can break encryption. So imagine your business as a home, and your locks and doors and your security system are your encryption. In 2025, you don't have any of those for your business. And at the same time, you think about 5G coming and becoming more of a commercially available capability. The adversary has been doing a very low and slow and deliberate pull of information from across the industrial base, our supply chain. They've been building the aggregate of the data. They have pulled, let's say you're a manufacturer on a plane that the Department of Defense buys, and all you're doing is the bolts. but there's someone else who actually is building the control pad. And there's another person who creates the source code for the control pad. The adversary's been pulling all of that data. They've been going into very vulnerable companies through phishing schemes, not through, blunt force trauma and, man-in-the-middle attacks, but simple things like phishing schemes where people in executive administration positions often click every email that they're given because that's their job. Adversaries are getting in that way. They're getting in when you go and you sit at a local coffee shop and you log in to do your work from your personal laptop in. That's how they're getting in. And they're taking that data, they're building the aggregate, and they've done it low and slow. Imagine in 2025, they don't have to worry about encryption, and they have 5G capability, where they can go in, they don't need to be quiet, it doesn't need to be low and slow, blunt force trauma, because that bandwidth is so greatly expanded. Things like that are why we're doing this so, there's such an urgency, is because we're going to take 5 years to get through our acquisition life cycle. 2025 is fast approaching. And that is our time. That's a ticking time bomb for us in the department because, as I said earlier, our industrial base, our supply chain, our national defense depends on you being there. And any chance that the adversary has is taking out our supply chain is a vulnerability and a risk that is too grave for us. This is a matter of national security. That's why we've put so much force and function behind the CMMC in the past year to make sure that you are as well prepared as possible, not only for us, but so that your business can survive and thrive. And that's what America is based on, right?
Yep. Well, I appreciate that follow-up and also the re-recording of a very excellent presentation that I'm glad we finally got where we could actually understand everything because of the bandwidth issues with Zoom. So we've been talking to Katie Arrington, who's currently the Chief Information Security Officer, to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. Thank you for joining us, Katie.
No problem. Have a wonderful day. Please, everyone out there, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care.
Thank you. I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV in preparation for the CMMC Impact on the GovCon 2. Thanks for joining us. Hi, I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios here near Washington, D.C. in preparation for the NeoSystems CMMC Impact on GovCon 2 conference. And with me right now via Skype is Sandra Schneider, who is president of Security University. Thank you for joining us, Sandra.
Thank you, Dave.
Great. So tell us what Security University does.
Security University is a small woman-owned business located in Herndon, Virginia. We teach hands-on cybersecurity, performance-based cybersecurity courses, certifications, and we're an accredited program in Northern Virginia that delivers cybersecurity certificate education.
So you're familiar with the CISSP and CASP and Security Plus. We're talking here about CMMC and what that's going to entail. Do you have any perspective on that?
I do, and it's we have 27,000 students across the country, and basically a lot of them are located in Northern Virginia. The CMMC is a part of a corporation's, security hygiene. So the basic hygiene every organization needs to have, they need to start with some type of basic programs and security plans. To make a long story short, the people who have not been security aware are now going to need to be security aware. Human resources across the board to the people who walk in every door. So at the end of the day, the Security Plus, the CISSP courses have been great precursors to cyber professionals, but now it needs to extend into the Human Resources Department and other acquisition areas throughout the enterprise. It's a great thing coming. And
compared to 171 and the training that went there, what's the parameters there?
So the 171 training, so 800, it started with 853. Let's get all our cyber security controls, let's get all security controls into groups that we can perform at the highest level our organization needs. The 171 is going to bring on the new security controls that the Department of Defense Acquisition Group believes are necessary security controls in order to maintain good cyber hygiene.
Okay. And how is it going to work with CMMC training from that perspective? And like level 1 through level 5 for the layman, what that is.
Sure. So Security University has an opportunity to work with groups like NeoSystems to help them prepare auditors to deliver NeoSystem audits. So all of their clients and their future clients are going to be able to go to a single location, and whether or not they're a level 1, which is basic level 1 cyber hygiene, they understand antivirus, they understand how an incident and how to respond to an incident. At level 2, they'll have more security awareness training, they'll have more risk management, they'll be able to understand how to do backups, things that they don't currently do. They might say they do, but don't practice on a daily basis. NeoSystems will come in and they'll audit or pre-audit all the organizations to give all the organizations that are positioning themselves to do CMMC type of contracts, because it's going to be a contractual requirement, not just I say I do this like they did before. Now it's you have to prove that you've done this with some type of certification, something that validates that up to a level 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And so a level 3, an audit for level 3 could be a couple of weeks trying to get your organization ready to comply with the 171 particulars. All stakeholders are going to be responsible at that point in time to be able to say that it's not just security awareness, it's how we do it, this is how we do it. We're going to not just check the box, we're going to show them we know how to do it and be certified to do that.
Excellent. So what do you see the CMMC parameters for training then? What are the requirements going to be, and more importantly, when will they be defined?
Well, the DoD MOU was just signed yesterday, so that's a great step forward. Now I believe that the certification body, the CMMC AB, is putting together parameters for what the training is going to look like for a level 1 type of individual who will have to be certified all the way through to the organization that will have to be certified at level 1, level 3, 4, and 5. So level 1, basic security awareness, and the type of training that will be necessary, depending on what the Department of Defense delivers, could be up to 6 different courses. We don't know yet. But the level 5 will definitely be a number of different courses, real skills to show us that they know how to do an assessment. The assessors know how to assess. It's not just check a box. They'll be able to go in and prepare organizations to get the job done so that they can be certified. So once they come through regular training, whether or not it's a level 3 training, we don't know how many classes, but at the end of the classes, they should be able to say, I've taken the exam, I've been through the training, I am certified, and I'm going to continually certify because it will also need some constant monitoring.
And if people want to find out more about Security University, where should they go on the web?
Sure, they can go to securityuniversity.net.edu and .com.
Excellent. We've been talking to Sandra Schneider, who is the president of Security University. Thank you for joining us via Skype.
Thank you for having us.
I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios near Washington, D.C. in preparation for the NeoSystems CMMC Impact on GovCon Part 2. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Gardy. It's now back 12:20 Eastern Time, and we're ready for the next panel, which is going to be moderated by Terry Roberts, who's CEO and President of Whitehawk Incorporated Cybersecurity Exchange. We're going to have some of the participants in this panel, because we're noticing that in the room when we've got lots of Zoom during this congestion problem they're having, there is more issues with the audio, which is what we're trying to get through. So we may have some people shut their video off. I'll turn it over to Terry, and we'll go from there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dave. Great to be here. So happy that we were able to do this using your wonderful services. I'm really ecstatic to be able to moderate our industry panel and take everything that we heard before us and throw it back from an industry perspective where actually we're the ones that are going to have to implement CMMC. So this is a critical perspective. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Ed Bassett. Ed is a career computer scientist, cyber innovator, and entrepreneur. Ed is currently the CISO at NeoSystems and was previously the founder of Metasecurity and president of GP Project and VP at Cyber. Next, we have Johan Detweiler. Johan is a career information security solution architect and government regulation consultant. Johan is currently the Director of Operations and Security at Talatek, and previously was Risk and Compliance Lead at Chickasaw Nation Industries. The following panelist is Jim Shifalakwa, career computer scientist with a focus on cyber and information security. He is currently the VP and CISO at Peraton, and previously was the CISO at Quotient 3 and VP and CISO at Circo. Following that, we have Felix Weiss. Felix is a senior software developer and business information systems professional. Felix is currently the executive director at the CyberClan and previously at DavTech. I might have mispronounced that, so don't shoot me, Felix. And last but not least, we have Tom Tollerton. Tom is a career information systems, business, and cybersecurity management professional, currently the managing director of cybersecurity data privacy services at Dixon Hughes Goodman, and previously a cybersecurity lead at SAIC and network engineer at Beals Inc. So you all should be extraordinarily impressed. What we'd like to do is start with short opening remarks so that you can see the different perspectives from each of these industry experts. Am I coming through okay, Dave? Okay. And so we're going to start out with what do they think is achievable across industry in the near term, but from their perspective regarding the implementation of CMMC. So Ed, can we start with you?
Thanks, Exactly. My video, I'll work out okay. From my perspective as a service provider, CMMC is on the real world solutions, right? Finding ways to meet expectations, some of the things you heard Katie about, in ways that are affordable, operationally feasible, we can actually get it to work, and it's effective in countering the threat. And the idea is here that we really want not just the answering the mail in terms of checking the box. DoD has been very clear that CMMC is not intended to be a checklist, but is our security posture. It's really effective to keep threat from stealing our intellectual property and affecting national security. I was at a conference, not 8A Association, so a conference of a little over 1,000 small businesses in the DoD space. I was on a panel with two representatives from the DoD. This was prior to CMMC coming in, and a question was asked from small business for what is the expectation of the government. And DoD rep at conference said we expect every contractor to meet every requirement at all times. And I guess my response at the time, and I thought still now, is reality is much different. Right? After working as a long consultant, probably over 100 clients, I've never found even a single that met every requirement all the time. Everybody's got things that are a little shaky on, they're working hard on. So what CMMC intended to do, CMMC is to close the gap between that expectation, which is, I'll say a little bit, but it's a realistic expectation for the DoD, close the gap between that expectation and reality. So how does it do this? First is clarifying requirements. Under the NIST 171 and the DFARS class, a lot of questions about what is the government's intent. There's really no to ask. Contracting officer, maybe, but answer. Standard published by NIST, language. If you're a scientist, maybe tough if you're not. A lot of things left is the judgment call for the contractor. Those contractors have expressed in many forums they have a lack of clarity is there. CMMC has done a really nice job of raising that up, put explanations and example into the standard. And as we're going to have as standards come out, I think it'll become even clearer what doesn't meet the requirements and what is good. Are going to be answered well by CMMC. Second piece is measuring maturity.
Ed,
It's the first
Ed,
time
I'm
we've seen.
so sorry.
Sure.
Ed, I'm
Yes.
so sorry to interrupt, but you started out a little bit clearer and then it went off. So I think I'm going to switch to Johan, but we'll come back and try you again. Okay. Okay. Johan, would you like to give us your perspectives on what is achievable across industry near term?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And thanks, Ed, for kind of starting to introduce the topics. And I just kind of want to pick up a little bit right where you left off talking about 800-171. I know a lot of people are really, really panicked out there because CMMC seems to be this big new thing, but there's a lot of really good news, especially for the first 3 levels. If you're trying to achieve a level 1 certification, the awesome news is that all 17 practices are included in 800-171 verbatim. So if you're looking for a way to assess yourself and determine if you've implemented those requirements, or if you want to implement those requirements and are trying to figure out what you need to do, you can go to 800-171A, and it will very clearly tell you exactly what you need to do in order for that to be considered implemented. When you look at level 2, all practices except for 7 of them are verbatim in 800-171. So again, you can use 800-171A to find out exactly what you need to do. For the 7 that aren't included, the good news is that they're taken from other security standards. Most of them are taken from 853. So you can go to 853A, and you can look and see exactly what it is that you're going to need to do and what you're going to be assessed against. And then when you go to level 3, all 110 requirements of 800-171 are verbatim in level 3. So level 3 is 800-171 plus an additional 20 practices. Those additional 20 practices, again, are taken from some pretty common security standards. So again, you can use documents like 853A to look and see if you're meeting the requirements or what you might need to do to implement those requirements. So there's a lot of tools out there for everyone currently to start looking into, doing your own self-assessments and doing your own gap analysis to have people, get an understanding of where you are currently. And I'll go ahead and stop there.
Great. Thank you. That was perfect framing. Okay, can we switch over to Jim? Jim, your perspectives of what's achievable across industry near term?
Thanks, Terry. That just kind of what Johan said, which was excellent. As a defense contractor, we really view DFAR 7012 and NIST 800-171, of course, as the minimum in cybersecurity. Even if you don't have CUI all over the place, and let's face it, most of us have CUI within our enterprise. So, it was always a minimum set of best practices. Earlier today, Norma Graham pointed out that the controls in 800-171 overlap, or should say intersect, with a lot of other compliance frameworks. If you're in the finance industry, if you're in medical industry, you have compliance frameworks that talk about the same kind of controls, the same kind of practices. So again, DFARS today, 800-171 is something we should all be doing anyway. If you look at the additional controls in CMMC level 3, they're quite reasonable, quite natural if you're currently DFARS compliant. So CMMC3 should be a given. Now, our company in particular is very cloud enabled, so we rely on a lot of third-party services. This is where things get, I won't say complicated, but you really do need to work with your third-party providers. For instance, if they're FedRAMP or they meet DoD security reg guidelines for cloud services, that's a start. But keep in mind that you're not going to get to levels 4, and certainly not to levels 5, unless you make sure all of your services, all of your supply chain that influences your security controls are also compliant. Now, given that, just because your third party is compliant doesn't mean that you're using it in a way that makes you compliant as well. So the good news, as Johan said, it is very straightforward. It's something we should be doing today. I was on a seminar the other week, and the worry was, what about the 1 or 2 person company? Well, the good news is it's fairly straightforward for them too, especially if you use third-party services. So It's a holistic approach, if you will, sometimes called an ecosystem that we have to manage.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. Felix, let's do a little bit of a twist. Can we focus from the perspective of a small or mid-sized contractor? Especially, I frame it with they don't have a CIO, they don't ISO. What's achievable across them in the near term, and any other perspectives that you want to bring up?
Well, most definitely. SMBs, you mentioned, without having that dedicated security leadership, or understanding with frameworks or other standard requirements, getting support from leadership about why these controls need to be implemented, and having that carry that down, that mission down to the data owners and the staff, so that they implement it in the right way, and also that have the buy-in to actually do it effectively. And for a small business, there's a little bit more work to be done than for a large business, because what typically happens with businesses, they already adhere to some kind of framework, they have at least done a gap analysis, they have to where they need to be. Well, small businesses usually the budget does not exist. There's a nice budget sometimes, though sometimes it's also just ad hoc. There's no specific security budget. Now, what organizations, the SMBs, at least now that CMMC is still relatively new, is at least start identifying all the pieces that of the CMCC and what's going to look like. Now, the good news of a small business is that it's likely that you're just a relatively small fish in the supply chain. You likely only need to comply with the rules of CMCC, which are relatively easy to implement, are more or less specific. On the other hand, however, the downside of being SMB is that when you handle a lot of classified data sensitive higher levels, that there will be a monetary and time investment, technology, processes, procedure, and the staff that you all need to implement, which is more difficult to bear for a small organization with a limited budget. As the CMMC is relatively new, what organizations, especially SMB, should do right now is having a look at frameworks, trying to identify where on the level of maturity they're going to end up, and look at what's already in place and what pieces and how they get there. To get it stuff is going to take some time, especially if you've got nothing in place yet. You're going to need to develop procedures, policies, all those things. But luckily, the CMMC is to that point.
Thanks, Felix. Just so you know, you're coming in equally broken as Ed is. So when we back, we'll do a sound check and see if we can include you in the discussion. I think the global pandemic is eating up our bandwidth. So for those of us that have good bandwidth, hopefully we can move forward. So the next question is focused on an industry perspective of what are the mutual responsibilities across the different players, starting out with government. In other words, what do we think we'd love to see from government? So I'd like to start off with that, which is, I think, framing the CMMC controls and approaches and levels and pulling all the different standards together has been extraordinarily helpful and a foundational effort. What I would like to see is maybe a little more description of really what are the responsibilities of the primes and what is expected from the small and mid-sized businesses. Ed, do you have a perspective of where, what government do further to enable the adoption and implementation of CMMC broadly?
Yeah, are you able to hear me now? I switched over to the phone, so maybe that improved things.
Yay, much better.
Yay.
You're in.
Good. I kind of alluded to this earlier and maybe didn't come through, but I think CMMC has done a really good job of making the requirements at the base level, making the requirements more clear than they were under 800-171. They've added examples, they've added explanations into the standard. We're expecting to see some assessment guidelines that I think are going to make that even more clear. So certainly that's a government responsibility that they've stepped up to quite a bit. Things we're still waiting on maybe are some guidance on inheritance and how inheritance is going to work. And a question that I keep hearing over and over is, please tell us what the CUI is. Please help us to identify that. I've heard contractors say if the government doesn't label it, I don't have to protect it, which I don't think is true, although I'm not a lawyer. But I think there's been some confusion over who really qualifies. Katie talked about the cleared defense contractors, those people who have security clearances, certainly. But I think there's people who are outside that who maybe aren't sure which things need to be protected and which things don't. I think CMMC is going to go a long way by specifying a level that's required in the contract. So I think that's going to help us out.
Oh, perfect. It came in 100%. So for moving to the phone. Jim, you have perspectives about regard primes, how government could enable the primes to take this on fully?
Yes, and following up on what I said, first of all, we do need to see those assessment guidelines because the best thing to do is to audit off before the assessors come, and they're about to be released. So it's one thing to have the controls, but to see how they're going to be assessed against you is extremely helpful. One thing the primes can do is really need to help the small partners. For instance, one thing that you can do is if you have a partner or a subcontractor, especially a small business, struggling and has CUI, the prime should really consider perhaps setting up the infrastructure or allowing the partner to come onto the prime's infrastructure. That works in the, I shouldn't say the other direction, but that works upward as well. One thing I think we need to encourage the government, specifically the agency or service that's contracting us, is if they want, especially level 4 or level 5, maybe establishing a consortium, especially when it comes to cloud services, where you can do the work on a combined structure. So not just talk amongst each other, but help out each other. One thing we don't want to do is we don't want to build stovepipe disparate systems that each have to be certified, especially at the higher levels. So I think as a prime, we could both help our subs and help our client in bringing all the community together and fielding something that we're safe with the risk management.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I realize that the whole appraisal framework is not mature and fully completed, but Johan, do you have thoughts about in a perfect world how that could be set? Any framing thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know the accreditation body is going to be working on this, and we hope to start seeing this. One thing that everyone needs to understand is that there are going to be organizationally defined parameters that are going to have to be released by the DoD or the accreditation body. And what I mean by that is if you look at some of the requirements, 800-171 said, the organization needs to decide how many login attempts can occur before the system locks down. Well, with this new CMMC program, my assumption is going to be that the DoD and the accreditation body are going to say specifically that number. So they'll say 3 login attempts before the system locks. That's kind of a rudimentary example, but when you start thinking about things like level of encryption, types of monitoring that are going to be allowed, types of traffic that are going to be allowed or explicitly denied, we need to see those ODPs sooner rather than later in order to understand really what level 3 is asking for and really what levels 4 and 5 are asking for. So that's something that's going to be very important, and it's also just a little bit of a concern, not a concern, but just a curiosity, because I don't know if anyone noticed, but in CMMC requirements version 1, some of the real world examples and discussions reference stuff that's not real common on the street right now, such as FIPS 140-3 validated encryption, which is not really a standard right now. FedRAMP requires FIPS 140-2. So if they're going to require that type of stuff, it's going to be very important for us to know that very soon. That way we can start to understand, okay, yes, it's level 1 or yes, it's level 3, but you are going to have this level of encryption, or, you know, this type of monitoring, or these ingress and egresses are going to be allowed versus these ones explicitly being denied.
Excellent. Tom, you also, do you have thoughts out from the certifying authorities and the appraiser's perspective of how to move this forward, how to fast track it?
Well, so I appreciate the question. So, I mean, as an assessor of with several other frameworks and frankly in private industry, you know, we get these questions a lot. It comes down very often to auditor's judgment, as we call it in our industry. And so this is why I think it's really important to, I think, a comment that was earlier made. The time is now, you know, to start thinking about the system, the environment that you have, the nature of data that you would be handling as a part of a contract, and work with your third-party providers, work with your IT folks, and work with some industry professionals familiar with NIST 800-171 that have done those type of assessments that may end up being a certifying partner, to start just asking those questions and fleshing them out so that there aren't surprises, you know, when it comes to undergoing the certification audit.
Great. Are you volunteering to participate in that process?
Sure. Well, it's always better to flesh out questions early than it is to do it late. Questions late in an audit are never good.
Thank you so much. So several of you have a governance and compliance and audit background. Is there low-hanging fruit for small and mid-sized businesses? Because of course with the primes, right, they've got entire offices and a volume of expertise in this space. But for the smaller or mid-sized businesses, is there fruit that they can jump on right away regarding the governance, risk, and compliance, or the documentation of their processes to get to level 1? And I'm opening it up. Who'd like to talk first?
Hey, this is Felix. Just jumping in here. I think the way the CMMC is structured is done in a way to make it easy for SMBs to start building their security resiliency with the model of the multiple levels, and level 1 being significantly easier than level 2, and then being cumulative in the sense that if you want to be level 3 compliant, you need to be level 1 and 2. It gives every single organization a good entry point into obtaining a level of certification, and therefore slowly building their resiliency. I think especially for businesses that haven't done it before or are still working on building their initial security hygiene framework, having a guided method of getting to the level they need to be is going to be very helpful, as it becomes manageable and it won't become too much of a complicated situation where they don't know where they need to start and where they need to end. The CMMC clearly dictates this is where you start, get all these pieces in place, and then you can move on to the next level. So for the organizations that don't necessarily have the in-house expertise, it draws a path for them to either acquire that expertise and acquire the solutions necessary in a structured and controlled manner.
Excellent, Felix, and you're coming in clearly, just so you know. So thank you. I'm sorry. Who is
I switched to phone audio, so yeah.
Ed, got the floor.
Ah, good. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't hear the response there. Terry, I've been suggesting to people to really start with maturity. I think that's the ripest fruit out there. I think, and the reason is two. One is it's something that when you get to an audit, you want to show track record. You want to show that it's been in place and working for some time. So doing those maturity things first is important. And the other is it's not naturally occurring in small businesses, right? So I think you look at the business drivers, the operational drivers in a small business, their IT shops don't need the level of maturity around things like configuration management, for example, that are required by CMMC. Just to be operationally effective, they can get a long way with word of mouth, with ad hoc processes, and things work pretty well. Big companies, need that maturity, those rigor, because they have a more complex situation, but SMBs really don't. So these are new behaviors that they need to put in place. Policies, SOPs, plans, configuration management, incident response, all those things I think are really, really good places to start. And again, not something they would probably have there. They're not required by 171. It's all new requirement, maturity requirements in CMMC.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Terry,
yeah.
Terry, let me add something here. This is Jim. The small businesses actually are at an advantage in some ways. The infrastructure is small. You can get the people to understand the infrastructure in a room. Maybe it's like you had said. Maybe it's just one person. There's not this complexity of, all right, if we need to implement certain control, or if we need to have a process for configuration management, that may actually be one person. And my advice to get the CMMC guidelines, or better yet, get this 800-171 as a small business, get those knowledgeable IT people, knowledgeable enterprise infrastructure people in a room. And first of all, take a nice breath. Look at the requirements, look at the intent of them. If you want to know where to start in terms of tightening up your security controls, absolutely start with multi-factor authentication. If you don't have it, get it. If you don't get it, you are at enormous risk. So even the 800-171 recognizes the fact that that's a primary control. You feel badly if you don't have MFA. So there's a logical place to start. Being smaller in some ways is better. So take advantage of that. Look at the guidelines, breathe, and take your time.
Thank you. I'm going to push back just a little bit as a small business, which is when you look across the TFARs and the 171 and the myriad of controls, if you don't own your own infrastructure, if you don't have a sophisticated operation, then most of those controls don't apply to you. So I personally think what would be helpful to small and mid-sized businesses that maybe, contract out a lot of their IT or security is, what is that compressed list? We often use the CIS controls because they're more applicable. They map to NIST, right? But they're more applicable to a smaller mid-sized business. And so it's really, kind of cheat sheets like that I think would be very helpful to give them on ramp, because when you look at the gamut of everything that applies under CMMC, it could scare the heck out of you into not taking action.
Well, put your vendors to work. Put your third-party providers. Really, and I'll use Microsoft as an example, or maybe I should use NeoSystems. Have controls that help you and maybe even make you CMMC compliant. Let them take first crack at. Look, you have A, B, and C. Maybe you only need D. I'm a big proponent of putting our vendors to work, so that might be a place to start as well.
Okay, that's a good tip. Okay. We're hearing earlier from Katie Arrington about, the volume of defense industrial base companies, right? 330,000 plus. And I would say, that is a heck of a lot of scaling. All of you have technology backgrounds. Are there any automation approaches that could be leveraged that maybe you've seen for other areas, or maybe you've seen regarding cyber risk, cyber monitoring, cyber maturity and improvement that could be leveraged to scale the implementation of CMMC within a few years by waiting for 2025? Who has some thoughts?
Ooh, I'll jump on this one. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right. So it's all going to depend on which area of or which domain of the CMMC certain items are in. There's items such as documentation and procedures and processes, and that can be automated to a large extent, as all the policies about hiring, about firing, about user education, those are going to be largely the same no matter which organization will try to implement them. So if we collectively build a standardized set of templates or processes that an organization can use then to just slightly tweak to fit their specific requirements, that can alleviate a lot of the manual work that would go into building those yourself. Now, on the technical side, a lot of the controls that you see are about auditing or log keeping or record keeping. And those also, similar to the policy development, can be defined on a computer, on an infrastructure term, right? As soon as we get the specifics, as in these logs or records need to be kept for this long, at that point, organizations or service providers can start building configuration changes that will just roll those out across the board. So I think there is a lot of value in automating a lot of it, and a lot of it we will be able to automate. But then there's also the pieces that are very specific to your infrastructure, to your systems, that will become a bit more tedious or a bit more complex to implement in a fully automated fashion.
Okay, great insights, Felix. I think, Tom, were you trying to chime in, or was it someone else?
Well, I would just echo that there are document management solutions, GRC tool solutions, governance, risk, and compliance tools that can help automate the management, if not even of the audit requirements of policy and procedure, to help standardize those across medium and larger organizations. Certainly helps streamline the governance effort.
Yep.
So this is Ed. I agree with what Tom and Felix said in respect to the administrative side for sure, and be able to automate that. I do want to give a little bit of a warning, though. I think on the technology side, every product that's sold to a government contractor in the next 5 years is going to be listed as CMMC compliant or somehow helping you with your compliance. And I think it's important to ask the vendor which specific CMMC requirements are met and what's the shared responsibility matrix. And we've seen this with FedRAMP. You have many services that are FedRAMP compliant. That doesn't mean they're all equal in terms of which piece of the compliance burden they take on and which they leave as something that has to be dealt with by the purchaser. So just ask, what are my responsibilities when I buy this product? What do you cover, and what are my responsibilities that are left for me to handle?
That's a great point, Ed. Responsibilities. You just can't buy compliance.
Right. Okay.
And I kind of want to
go ahead,
jump
please.
in just real quick on that idea too. That is so important for everyone to understand, both as service providers that are looking to help vendors achieve compliance. If you offer an audit solution, like Ed said, make sure that you specifically say, these are the requirements that our product is going to help you meet. So if you buy our product, you will get X, Y, and Z. But also, you are going to be responsible for configuring this. There's a lot of platforms out there that are going to have to make better strides at really informing their customers. So if you're a service provider, think about that. Think about helping your customers, because that, if I can easily go to you and say, I know for a fact, if I purchase your product, I'm going to be able to meet these requirements and I can get some sleep at night. That's such a value added, as opposed to, I'll even throw out Microsoft Office 365. Who's really sure about what it takes to make Office 365 171 compliant? They say it's possible, but there's some issues there that I have some questions about, and it's just not as transparent as I'd like to see. And I really would encourage service providers to try and make CMMC the framework that's as transparent as possible.
Okay, great. So a lot of cloud providers, right? I mean, a lot of businesses, majority of businesses have moved portions of their business operations or their data management or their data access and control, right, to commercial cloud provisioners. How can CMMC be baked into that? And could that be a way of giving some businesses a leg up on meeting a CMMC certification? Is that possible?
Terry, this is Jim. As a company who've moved most of their infrastructure to the cloud, it's a double-edged sword. When you move to the cloud, and to dovetail on what Felix and Ed Tom were saying earlier, you make sure your service provider, which in this case is a cloud, and maybe it is Microsoft 365. First of all, you have to provision a level of service that that's required for CMMC. I mean, that may mean government cloud, that may mean GCC high, may mean Azure high. It all depends on what kind of level you're going for, what kind of responsibilities that your clients expect. And again, just because you have all the mechanisms and the controls in the cloud doesn't mean you're using them properly, and doesn't mean they're configured properly. The other edge of that sword is, now that you're on the cloud, your risk profile is much different. I mentioned multi-factor authentication before, not by coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
If using a cloud service and you don't have MFA,
right,
you're being hacked as we speak. So, it's
right.
it's very possible, just like cloud in and of itself. It used to be, oh no, it's inherently insecure. And then it moved to, oh, it's inherently secure. The truth is, it's someplace in between, depending on what you provision and what controls you enable.
No, that makes perfect sense. So thank you for that clarification. So should primes, as they're struggling, right, with the accountability in many ways for taking care of their subcontractors or their vendors or their suppliers, should they form a consortium where they are responsible for a swath, right, of those subcontractors and suppliers, and then share that support so that it doesn't have to be done multiple times? Or are there other, consortium partnership-like models that could be implemented so that, again, this can scale and the burden can be shared? And any ideas on that?
Terry, this is Jim again. Perhaps, I'll give you one example, the NDISAC, National Defense Sharing and Analysis Center. That's kind of a mini DIB, if you will. Any company can join it that does defense business. Getting that kind of threat information from NDISAC can fulfill a lot of the level 4, level 5 threat intelligence requirements. So it works with that part. I don't know if it'll work with the other parts, but there's at least a model for sharing. Now, again, that's not sharing, with very small companies, because it costs several $1,000s a year to join NDISAC at a minimum. But it very well, that could be one model. I would prefer to see sharing with the government as well, having them put up, perhaps collaboration portals, perhaps services that we can come to as a prime community. And bring our small businesses with us.
Okay. Anyone else? Those are great thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to
please.
jump in on that. This is Johan. I just wanted to point out that in the original NeoSystems conference back on January 28, Katie Arrington indicated that she was really, really excited about that idea as well. Kind of data sharing across major entities, including the DoD, because really the only way that we're going to get out in front of some of these kind of zero-day attacks that we're seeing now is to start correlating our heuristics data and our signature data and actually starting to recognize trends before they take hold on networks. Because even if you're level 5, if you're seeing a new zero-day attack, actually what's happening right now in the world with COVID-19 and everyone kind of taking advantage of that is a perfect example of how it's next to impossible to really protect yourself if something has never occurred before. So she was very open to that. And then she's also very open to the idea of the DoD creating some type of marketplace where small and medium businesses can go and see services that have been vetted in some way. Obviously, this is all up for how it's going to be done, but the services that have been vetted that can provide them, you know, level 4 or level 5 or level 3 services so that they could utilize them very easily. So it's very exciting and hopefully very, very interesting times coming up.
Well, and
Yeah, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Who was chiming in? Thanks, you.
The primes are, you know, responsible. Sorry, Felix, go ahead. I'll come after you.
No, you go for it. Apologies.
Okay. Terry, the primes, you know, have a dependence on their supply chain, right? So in as much as the smaller, less mature members of the supply chain might need help, also the larger primes who may have already solved these problems from a cybersecurity perspective, they're dependent on their supply chain to get CMMC certified. So I think we're seeing a lot of motion by primes to try to help mentor and guide and even track their suppliers and how they're doing, provide them with some support. And on the kind of the extreme end of it, where you've got suppliers that maybe have no IT maturity whatsoever, so even level 1 is a stretch. We've talked to some primes about putting in some secure enclaves, places where contractors could come and work on the DoD information without having to worry about their IT that they run. And for very small companies that really, you know, maybe DoD work is a small piece of what they do, and so it doesn't make sense for them to invest in this, even like I say, even a level 1 certification.
Yeah, and
Great.
I think in general, a lot of the I think a lot of the cyber industry in general is already very common with knowledge sharing in general, due to it basically being a cat and mouse game at all times. And for us defenders or us organizations under attack to be able to withstand the constant developments, it's just in general imperative that we share that threat intelligence and that we share data in general. And I think it shouldn't be too much work or too difficult for us to extend that to a level where we can also try to tie it back to the domains more clearly in terms of what attacks are out there, in terms of the incident response, what should be our general responses to various types of incidents. In terms of the awareness and training, these are the items that are coming through, and this is how organizations should look at solving them. By doing that, especially for the SMB space, they won't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, which would be a huge loss of opportunity and time in general. So there's a lot of information that is ready to be shared. It's just not all compiled in an easily accessible space right now. And I think that's where we can really get a lot of value out of this.
Thank you so much. So before we go to closing remarks, where each of you can speak for a minute, last statement to make to the audience. As the token cyber intelligence person involved on the panel, I have seen the advent of publicly available data sets and cyber risk baked into AI algorithms, and the ability to provide situational awareness of cyber risk across entire sectors. Do any have any experience with those kinds of technologies like Expanse and Insight and Riskcon and Guard, and the ability to be able to see trends and then have that as a lens from the outside in a defense industrial base? Any thoughts of how that could play into CMMC?
Hey, this is Johan again. Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of what I was alluding to earlier, is that those tools are absolutely phenomenal. Augmented intelligence is without a doubt the wave of the future when it comes to network monitoring. But the intelligence is only as vast as the network that it sits on. And that's why I was really excited to hear that Katie Arrington and DoD was interested in creating some sort of database that would greatly expand anyone's network footprint. Because, you know, if you're one of the primes, your network is very large and you can gather a lot of data points. But if you're a small or medium business, even if you have the most expensive augmented intelligence tool, you might only have 1 or 2 ingress points that you're monitoring. So you're not really building a very strong footprint. But think if you had the ability to go to a marketplace and leverage one of those tools that was getting the data from all of the DoD contractors, you know, all of those signatures, all of that heuristic data was then available to you. Well, then your network becomes as big as all of those contractors' networks combined. And that's what's really exciting about these possibilities here.
Yeah. Johan, I could not agree with you more.
Terry, by definition, can't
Yes.
threat intelligence just by looking at the inside. You have to look on the outside. And intelligence services that help you correlate between what you're seeing on the inside of your infrastructure and what's occurring on the outside. Those kinds of services are, I think, the third-party assistance. We're not talking necessarily a full MSSP. We could be about, you know, just endpoint detection services or just simple threat intelligence feeds with the tools to be able to apply them to what you're seeing on the inside. So by definition, you know, not only do you need tools, but you need data inside.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so in wrapping up, I thought I'd circle back with Ed. So just a few parting remarks for the audience.
Thanks, Terry. It's early days on CMMC, right? So far, we're having a really good time working with all the early adopters. These are defense contractors that see good cyber hygiene as a competitive advantage, so they're in some ways excited to do it. We're really glad to see that DoD is listening to feedback and open to changing the program and fixing the glitches to make it work really smooth. So far, I'll say as a service provider, as we work to put together compliant reference architecture solutions, things that make economic sense and operational sense, CMMC looks really achievable to us. It's not simple, it's not necessarily easy, but it's achievable. And we think it's going to dramatically amplify the security posture of the defense industrial base. So yeah, I'm really liking where this is going.
Great. Felix, any closing remarks?
Yes, I'm very much agreeing with Ed there that the way this framework has been provided, how they laid it out with the various levels is a great way for organizations to be able to actually pull it off. NIST 800, 171, or 53 were always challenging. Often were considered too difficult. And when things are too difficult and don't seem achievable, the organization just tries to rubber stamp it and not actually improve their security posture. So with this level 1 to 5, I think they've done a great job at making it achievable for organizations. And overall, I'm excited to see the general security posture of the DoD contractors to go up. Especially someone who works in the incident response industry. We often see attacks that are targeted against small companies with a very small or not proper security hygiene posture, so that they can be used to then attack the real target, the bigger company with more mature controls. And that's always a risk, those so-called watering hole attacks, where all the organization is stepping stone to a bigger fish. So by allowing a framework that's dynamic and has multiple levels of security hygiene, I expect to see those kind of attacks really going down and just improving the security and integrity of the supply chain as a whole.
Perfect. Tom, any closing remarks?
Sure, yeah. I would just say that kind of reiterate the idea that it's not a destination, that this program is not a destination, that this is really going to require, for contractors, even the smaller ones, the development of a security program, ongoing process management, which is, you know, kind of to echo the not a check the box exercise idea, that there will need to be processes, people involved, and the framework is going to evolve. The framework is going to change over time because the threat environment is going to change over time as it has consistently. So I would encourage contractors not to take a wait and see approach to see how this thing fleshes out. I would encourage contractors to get started that aren't forward thinking, as we've kind of talked about here, that maybe it's time to start thinking about where we are right now as an organization, so that we can begin to implement remediation and be prepared when comes certification time.
Perfect. Johan.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, just kind of rolling on what everyone else said. You know, believe it or not, no matter what, your organization has data that somebody out there wants and is valuable to somebody that probably shouldn't have it. So, you know, you really just need to keep in mind that this now is a really great opportunity for guys to start securing yourselves and making sure that you're protecting yourselves to the level that you should be and doing your due diligence. It's important that we all do that. It's like fighting this virus right now. If we all pitch in, it makes everything better. And like I said in my opening remarks, the tools out there to start looking at these levels and start understanding them are there. So, you know, don't sit around and wait. This is definitely coming. 800-171 has been around. So just go ahead and start taking steps to getting yourself secure.
Perfect. And not least, over to Jim.
I'll just add, let's not forget we are a business. We're all in the business of getting customers and keeping the nation safe. And CMMC is really an opportunity to, you know, make ourselves better and enable our business. And if that's not enough, because of the, I think, really first time big teeth that come with CMMC certification and the contractual requirements. I heard Katie mention today that DFARS is going to be changed in October to actually point to CMMC. You know, it's something we have to do, but we do, and something we'll make money at. So, hey, you know, let's go.
Okay. Great panel. Thank you so much. I do want to add that I think anything that we can tee up that can help us to track the certification process, the appraisal process, the automation, the documentation, anything put up there so that enable companies to fast track their way to CMMC certification is my call to action to everybody. So with that, Dave Gardy, I'd like to turn it back.
Thank you, Terry. Great panel. Sorry for some of the interruptions. We may try to re-record some of the segments in the beginning there before people switch to the phones. And we've notified the panel after this, the last panel, the CMMC AB panel, that if they have an issue, go right to the phones. And Eric Crucis, who's the moderator, has been told about that. Right now, we're going to go to another sponsor message. This one from Ed Bassett, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for NeoSystems. Hi, I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios here near Washington, D.C. in preparation for the CMMC Impact on GovCon 2 with NeoSystems. And with us via Zoom right now is Mr. Ed Bassett. Ed is the Chief Information Security Officer for NeoSystems. Ed, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks very much.
Give us an overview. What is NeoSystems all about?
So NeoSystems is a full service back office service provider for federal government contractors. So we do the full range of things to help government contractors keep their businesses up and running, including accounting, IT, human resources, and security, which is what I'm here to talk about today.
What are some of the services and solutions and applications that you provide for your clients?
On the security side, we're focused on primarily on federal government compliance. So like today, we're talking a lot about cybersecurity maturity models, CMMC. That's really taken us with services we already had around running security programs for our clients, both the administrative side as well as the technical services that are needed to support that. So we have all the services needed to take over the full compliance burden for our clients.
What's the value proposition you offer that distinguishes you from other people in your space?
Well, we're doing these services on a managed service basis, so that makes them affordable to small and mid-sized businesses that may not have dedicated staff. They may not need full-time staff for specialized security functions, so they can get those things on a fractional basis from us. The other piece of our value proposition is our focus on the federal government contractor space. About 90% of our customers are federal government contractors. So all the solutions that we bring to the table are built from the ground up with compliance with those federal regulations in mind.
If people want to find out more about NeoSystems, where should they go on the web?
Our website is neosystemscorp.com. That's just neosystemscorp.com.
www.neosystemscorp.com. We've been talking to Ed Bassett, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for NeoSystems. Ed, thanks for joining us and supporting this great webcast today.
Hey, thank you very much.
I'm Dave Gardy, now back to CMMC, Impact on GovCon 2. I'm Dave Gardy from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us. Okay, it's now 1:17 Eastern Time for our final panel. This is the CMMC AB panel, and it's moderated by Eric Crucis, and I'll turn it over to Eric now.
Great, thank you so much. Great to be here again. Well, we've heard a lot about CMMC so far today. We've heard about the ins and outs of it. One really critical piece of this puzzle, of course, is the accreditation board. And we're so lucky to have members of the accreditation board with us today. So before I go to questions, and I know folks have questions of them, and I've tried to work them into the questions we'll ask today, I want to give a little bit of background about them. I could really read all of their bios and do that, and it would take up the entire time we have allotted because they're all very accomplished. But so I cut them down and tried to hit some of the highlights of the members of the accreditation board. The first member who I'm going to be talking to is Ty Schreiber. He's the chair of the board. He currently serves as senior director of executive education for the University of Virginia, the Darden School Foundation. He's spent 32 years leading people, developing teams, delivering results in the private and public sectors. He works with industry. He's led large business operations of large, mid-tier, small, and startup companies providing cyber engineering technology services for federal, state, and local governments. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1987. You could stop a bio right there, and that's a great accomplishment for the rest of your life with a BS in political science. He was selected service with the U.S. Marine Corps. He also has 2 graduate degrees from the Naval Postgraduate School, 2 master's degrees, a Master in Science and Systems Technology, and in National Security Affairs. Before I go to questioning Ty, I'm just going to introduce the rest of the board members who are joining us today. We have Carlton Johnson, who's the vice chair of the board. He's a senior executive with respected visionary leader with 32 years of subject matter experience in areas including cybersecurity and enterprise communications technologies. He's a decorated combat veteran and also served as the CIO for the Multinational Security Transition Command in Iraq. He retired from USAF active duty in 2014 as a colonel after 26 years of honorable service. And he's developed solutions that enable business transformation for multinational organizations and they exercise strategic leadership in firms of up to 47,000 employees and led resource asset portfolios of up to $5.5 billion. And he's currently the chief executive officer of Delane Strategies Group. He also has a master's degree and executive graduate certifications from various institutions, including George Washington University, National Defense University, West Virginia University, and ISACA and the U.S. government. Also joining Ty and Carlton is Mark Berman. He's a board member and he's chair of the communications committee on the board. He's the CEO and founder of FutureFeed, which is a modern compliance platform focused on NIST and other compliance standards. Before FutureFeed, he was the co-founder of ThinkStack, which is a national MSP which continues to inspire and facilitate innovation in organizations ready for digital transformation and the demands of solid cybersecurity at every step. Prior to that, Mark led a national manufacturing firm, several successful political campaigns. I'm not going to ask him which ones today. And he was COO of a $1.2 billion wealth management firm. He graduated from the College of William and Mary with a degree in computer science. and completed graduate work at NASA's Langley Research Center. He later completed an MBA at Loyola College. Joining her distinguished colleagues is Nicole Dean, finally, and certainly not least. She's the chair of the Infrastructure Committee on the board, also co-chair of the Nominations and Membership Committee. She is the CISO for Accenture Federal Services, where their goal is twofold. One is to protect Accenture's internal networks so they don't impact the mission of the company, and also to collaborate with their account leads by helping them securely implement the programs and keeping their clients' data secure. Prior to that, she was Global Chief Information Security Officer for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and she's held several federal positions as well. She's the director of the National Cybersecurity Division at DHS, as well as the National Cybersecurity Protection System Program Manager, which is known as Einstein. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in both liberal arts and technology and a master's degree in information system security from Colorado Technical University. Thank you all for joining us today. What a distinguished group, and really lucky to have you here today. And I'm going to start off with you, Ty, the chair of the board, as they say. I know a lot of things. There's been a lot of talk in industry about the memorandum of understanding that the board was negotiating with the Department of Defense, and I was wondering if you could provide an update of where that memorandum is and kind of what it means for the process that we're all going through right now.
Thank you, Eric. Delighted to be here and delighted to share the forum with colleagues from the AB. At long last, as of Monday this week, we finally have a signed memorandum of understanding with the Department of Defense. We're working to make this information available to the public in conjunction with our DoD partners, who right now are necessarily focused on the COVID-19 public crisis. The key impact for listeners or watchers are the AB now formally authorized, established, and implemented CMMC assessment, certification, training, and accreditation to help DoD achieve goals of improving cybersecurity across the defense supply chain. Thing two, the AB is the authoritative source. If the AB hasn't deemed your organization is certified, assessed, trained, etc., you aren't. And to be clear, there are no third-party entities that are certified CMMC assessments or any other services. So I think those are the two important things at this juncture. There's been an enormous amount of work to delay the MOU. A lot has gone on by our board, collaboration with our DoD partner and their contractors, probably in to all stakeholders, and that'll unveil itself here as we go through my colleagues and their remarks. The point is that now that we do have a formal relationship with DoD, this effort is hitting a whole different gear of as we continue to expand the level of collaboration, both with DoD and across the industry, and multiple lines of effort that are related to implementing CMMC in support of the aggressive schedule we're all very well aware of. So that's, I think, an important update. I wanted to kind of, if I can, just give you a couple of other things to think about. You know, the current status of the AB. For those who hadn't tuned into a prior conversation, the AB is incorporated as a nonprofit in the state of Maryland. Our application for tax exemption determination by IRS on Section 503 is in process. Our website is cmmcab.org. That's where you can get up-to-date and authoritative information on what exactly is going on with this process. We have a 15-member board of directors. We've got 7 committees. Each committee is led by a director, and we'll establish working groups that are focused on enabling critical stakeholder participation and input to help us in shape specific challenges and figure out how we implement the CMA standard. Working group not live, so more on that in a bit. We'll be creating some independent councils from academia, industry, and standards later in the spring. And the pace accelerates from here. I think it's also important to kind of understand our mindset as an organization. This really started as and remains a coalition of the willing. We're here to support and enable overarching CMMC, just to make another certification program, but that actually enhances the cybersecurity posture of our nation. We're open to and actively exploring innovative ideas and approaches. Our focus is on how, not why can't we? And we'll look to leverage, harness, and harvest the existing elements of great work that's been done across this domain, other certification, accreditation standards, so that we can implement it effectively, efficiently, and expediently to get to the goal. Cost effective. We know cost is a concern and currently unknown. Many of us are small business as well, so this element certainly has our attention. And we're, as an independent entity, we've got organizational maneuver and agility as tools to get this done in a rapid frame. Real quick, 3 principal lines of effort, for us. There's a lot going on concurrently. The levels, the levels of effort is build a business, which is just one thing. We are a startup, but we're using the experience of our very accomplished and seasoned board to make sure that we do this in a mature fashion. We're 2 months into operations. We're a formal entity. We have our IN, our cage code. We've gotten a lot done in a really short amount of time, and we're also acutely aware of just how much we have to do. Optimize the relationship with DoD and the PMO. We haven't started collaborating, communicating with PMO since this process started back in November. And I think we'd agree with all of Katie and her entire team, and enormous gratitude for the heavy lift, exceptional work that they've done to put this vision in place. So now that we've got the relationship formalized, we need to operationalize it so that we remain fully committed going forward and move forward. Lastly, we have to define, develop, and implement CMMC standard, putting everything in place that's required for us to operate as an independent entity that manages and oversees all things associated with CMMC accreditation, certification, training, assessment processes, and all the pieces and parts of that in accordance with the CMMC model provided by DoD. Lastly, I think the core operational tenets in terms of our approach, 3 C's. Collaborate. This is a team sport. We have and need stakeholder input. So messages please engage in this process. Communication. There are so many questions still in so many facets that will impact stakeholders as this process is established and implemented. A lot of the concern is driven by the lack of information or misinformation. And we're working to turn those unknowns into knowns as quickly as possible, and making sure that we get the information out as soon as it's available. And finally, clarify. A lot of conversation. Cybersecurity domain is both complex and complicated. The feedback that we've got as we've been in listen mode from the day one is that a lot of organizations subject to compliance are concerned about ensuring that we've got knowledgeable auditors do what they do in a standardized, repeatable experience. That's very important. And so we're looking to establish a baseline that is comprehensive and specific, and we're looking to create a common understanding in terms of how to do these things so that we reduce the room for interpretation and variance, and therefore frustration. Finally, making the information consumable. You've heard April, Katie's mouth is a target for crafting the assessment guide and other materials. We want to make sure we make anything that we consumable and understandable by whoever is involved. I'd just like to say, to everybody that's been involved in this process, it's been quite since November when we started down this road. It's amazing to me, how many just individuals across the DoD industry, the accreditation body, that really have come together, recognizing how important this is, and have volunteered so much of themselves to put it in place. And the breadth, the depth, the diversity of skill, experience, and represented at the table thus far, and what we need going forward is really, really important. So we'll maintain maintain that that focus of listening and incorporation of stakeholder input to figure this all out in a real team model. So there's that. We keep on the path that we've been on so far in terms of teamwork and collaboration, able to get this done, and it'll be a very important, great thing for our whole country in the base.
Great, Ty. What a wonderful overview, and really appreciate it. I'm going to move on to Mark next. Before I do, Carlton and Nicole, consider possibly, if it's possible, dialing in and using their phone audio. That might help the audio quality that we have. I know Mark has already done that, but if it's too much trouble, don't worry about it. But if it's possible, go ahead. Mark, just coming along to you now. Ty kind of gave a really nice broad overview of all the things that the board is doing, and it's certainly a lot to take on at one time. But I understand that the board is looking for help among folks in the industry, and that form of the help is in the working groups. And I was wondering if you could talk about what the working groups are, what the status is, and kind of what you're looking for volunteers for.
Sure, thanks very much. So thank you, Ty. I do appreciate that overview. One of the things that Ty said during his overview is that we are an organization that is built to listen, and we took that very seriously as part of our core mission from the beginning. This is a huge endeavor. The DoD should be commended for recognizing the need and having sort of a world tour of education leading up to the point where we are right now, and we want to continue that listening. So a couple of things before I get into the working groups. One is that very soon on our website, if you have an event where you need to hear from, or you would like to hear from one of us, there'll be a place where you can make a submission and make a request. There is always a survey on our website. We've had, it would just change recently. So if you represent a C3PAO, which is an organization that will provide the assessments, we're looking for some input right now on what types of information do you need to consider when you're organizing an assessment engagement. So that question changes as soon as we get enough information. We'll change it to something else. On the working groups really came out of our pre-formation days. Before we were an accreditation body, we had some working groups that sort of figured out the basic foundation for what the accreditation body would one day become. So we've tried to create a continued ability to listen to the great ideas and the experiences that are out in industry and in government and in other places. So if you go to our website right now, or if you do after the meeting, cmmcab.org, that's our website, and /groups will take you to our working groups. Each of our working groups is led by a committee. So as Ty said, there are 7 committees. Not all of them have working groups yet. We're getting that effort underway right now. But what you'll find when you get there is, I believe there are 4 of them, maybe 5 of them, 2 or 3 more going up either tomorrow or at the beginning of next week. Let me just hit the highlights of what we have up there. The standards committee. So our standards committee is there to look at the model that the DoD released and take that model along with an assessment guide. So if you're trying to prepare to be responsive to CMMC, there is an assessment guide that will be coming at some point. It is not released yet, so you might want to be thoughtful about the efforts that you're putting in right now to make sure that when that assessment guide comes out, you have a better understanding. We're working and collaborating with the DoD on that assessment guide. So the standards committee is looking at taking that model and guide and translating it into something that the assessors can use when they're looking at each company across the country. That group is forming now, and our groups generally are going to have 8 to 10 members when they're task oriented like that, or an ongoing group. Each group may have a different cadence. Sometimes we want a broad amount of information to come in. Sometimes it's a more narrow focused group. That particular group is looking generally at the standards and what needs to be accomplished, and you can find that at the top of the page, and it's reviewing the materials that we've received to date and working on the assessment criteria and the training and learning objectives. So moving on to the Accreditation and Credentialing Committee, they have 3 groups up right now looking for help on several topics. And again, I'll hit them at a high level. Accelerating the initial assessments. So one of the things that we're working with right now is the idea that while we would love to be able to do 300,000 different assessments all in the next few months and be up and running, the reality is this is going to be something that is deployed slowly over the next several years. But how can we get that first tranche of assessments done? What can we do about our process where we can learn from the first few assessments to inform the second group and the third group and so forth? So there's a group that's working on how can we qualify some very experienced assessors to provide those initial assessments so that we can learn from the experience and learn from them as experienced people in the industry. So apply to that group if you're interested. That final deliverable is April 15th. Most of these groups are going to be on a fairly short timeline. The assessment quality assurance group. So the next question that we need to solve, and we need your help, is how do we assure that somebody who is coming on site, who is representing a private C3PAO, is providing a quality assessment, collecting and looking at the right information, and doing what we need to do to evaluate whether a particular organization is meeting the requirements of CMMC. So that quality assurance oversight is extremely important to the accreditation body, and this group is going to work on how do we measure quality when you talk about something like doing an assessment and you're using people that are independent. In other words, the C3POs do not work directly for us. The assessors will work for the C3PO. What quality can we overlay and assure people that they have qualified and experienced assessors looking at the right information? The last group that I'll highlight that's out there right now is the assessment methodology working group. So there are many ways that you can approach an organization when an assessor walks in and they shake hands with you for the first time. What should they be doing? Should we be collecting information using technical means? How do we walk through an assessment? How do we ask questions? How do we collect information? How is that information distilled into findings at the end of an assessment? All of those things come together in an assessment methodology, and we're going to take several cracks at this. The first one is iteration 1, and there's a group that's working on that, again, with a work completion date in April. So we want to work on that. The cadence of all of this is going to produce an ecosystem that is trying experimentally using Pathfinder assessments over the next few months to develop a system that's going to work at scale. That system will be released as the regulations change in the fourth quarter at some point. That's all I have presentation-wise, so I'll pass the mic back over to the next person.
Great, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for that background on the working groups. And I think it's important for folks to realize that this is not, while the board is, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but while the board is kind of driving the train here, the board is really open to suggestions from industry and wanting to work with industry and folks in the government to help bring this process forward and make it the best process that it could possibly be, and make it a standard, and have this experience be as seamless as it could be for contractors.
I will go one step further and say that we can't do it without you. So while we can, some of the working groups already are very oversubscribed, but there are going to be plenty of them, and we need you ultimately so that we can build this. We're building this with you, not for you. So we're going to use these working groups. We're going to engage, and we're not using this just to be informed or to get a pat on the back if we do something nice. We're doing this to build it together with you.
That's great, and that's very true. I'm going to just move on to Carlton really for a few minutes right now. Mark has described a lot that the AB is doing. Ty has described a really terrific overview of all the things the AB is doing. So there's a lot of tasks, a lot of things happening in a hurry. And granted, you all have a lot of experience in this industry and great resumes. But how is the AB able to handle all these things that it's trying to implement and accomplish at the same time?
Thank you. This is a really good conversation, and I would tell you, starting out, the reason that we're able to accomplish as much as we're doing is it starts with really good people. When you look at the swath of members that we have on the team, we have experts from a variety of experiences and backgrounds coming to this, bringing not only that experience but additional capabilities and mindset to the effort. From the perspective of trying to organize all those different lanes, I tried to put it into 4 or 5 buckets. Number one, we're having a good understanding what ways we want to implement, determining the how behind the what, uh, doing a good assessment of the means, taking a strong look at the organizational capabilities we have inherent to the AB, and then looking outward for additional capabilities that we may need to bring into the fight. Keeping the ends always in front, trying to synchronize between time, space, and the objectives that the chairman has put forth to us, and then all along that path, considering the various risks to accomplishing these within that time and space. That all comes under the umbrella of synchronization. So again, looking at this from the beginning to end, we're focusing with the end state in mind. At the end of the day, the plans and the actions and the activities we have are all leveraged to achieve the goals we specified uh, in our charter for the AB and also what we've qualified in our bylaws for the deliverables that we have to produce. We're making sure across the teams that we stay integrated and coordinated. And through the communications committee that Mark leads, we are working to strengthen communications across the board, uh, both from the committee aspect and the working groups. Given the readiness at that time and place to move forward, we're taking a very detailed look at the various activities we need from a resource-based perspective. We started, as Ty alluded earlier, the 21st of January. And we started with 15, well, actually about 90 something people, coalition of willing, going down to 15 people. We're resource constrained in that regard, but we're delivering a lot of things within that resource constrained environment. And with the building of the business aspect, we're going to expand that out. And everything we're going to do is go from a resource informed perspective. We're framing our activities with a clear understanding of the changes that are happening in the external environment, because as we know, we're talking about cyber and the adversary gets a vote. So we're constantly keeping in mind how the threat landscape is changing, uh, how tactic techniques and procedures are changing, technologies that are coming out, and bringing those into that conversation. And at the end of the day, we're making informed decisions based off the best products and services that are available, not only in the marketplace, but then seeing how we can bring those into the various swim lanes for the 7 committees that we have to push that forward. Uh, I think at the end of the day, the big piece that helps us stay in sync is that we're remaining, again, with our core tenets of collaboration, clarity, and communication, remaining active, adaptive, and flexible as a entire AB team. We're staying networked with each other. We're staying collaborative, and we're maintaining that collaboration across the 7 committees. And now with the additional alignment of building a business, enabling and engaging the DoD conversation, and then building out that overall criteria, we're able to push those agenda items forward. The last thing I want to say is that this whole effort is predicated on having a set of ethics and a mindset of conflict of interest mitigation. Because again, each one of us comes from various different business backgrounds. So we've nested within not only the bylaws, but for each of the board members, a set of ethics and compliance. So we remain righteous up front as we're delivering these capabilities. All that gets synchronized together to push out the objectives that the chairman has laid out.
Carlton, that's great. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to move on to Nicole really quickly. So Nicole, can you hear me okay, by the way? I'm not sure she can. So if David, if you could try to get Nicole to associate her phone with the audio, or Nicole, if you want to turn on your microphone from your computer, that would work as well.
I rejoined through the computer.
Oh, good.
Can you hear me now?
Sorry about the technical issues. Yes, I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay.
And everyone, appreciate your patience. We were supposed to do this in studio, or we were supposed to do this in person, then we moved to in studio, and there wasn't quite enough social distancing there, so we're on the fly. We did this over webcast, so I appreciate everyone's patience. Carlton really described very well how this is a really multifaceted effort, and I think that builds upon what Ty and Mark were talking about. How is the AB going to kind of ensure that the parties, the DoD, the AB, the community are working constructively together to kind of get to all the places that we all want to get to?
Yeah, so I mean, I really think that comes back to Ty's point when he said how we need to now operationalize the relationship with the DoD. So, while we've been all, waiting to formalize the relationship, there's been lots of conversations going back and forth, lots of planning, lots of strategic thinking happening. But it's really kind of time to get like tactical and formalize all that. So, some of the things that we're doing is we're setting up, regular and recurring meetings with DoD, between DoD and between the various committees and working groups that we've set up within the AB. We're going to be working to collaborate on an integrated master schedule between two of us, because we really want to make sure that both what we're doing from the AB standpoint and the piece and parts that DoD owns, that we're in lockstep and barrel, hand in hand together, moving this out. We don't want to go left if they're going right, and vice versa. So there's going to be a lot more discussion, a lot more collaboration actually happening between the groups, but at a much more tactical level than has been occurring to date. So really looking forward to getting those started, actually making this happen, because it's really amazing what Katie Arrington and the Department of Defense have been able to do, pushing the CMMC out in the expeditious manner that they did. Moving something that fast through a government bureaucracy is generally much more difficult, and they've really overcome some hurdles to make this happen. And we want to support them in every way, shape, and form that we can, so we can secure the DoD supply chain and make this safer for everybody in the ways that we work today.
Great. And what Nicole, just to follow up really quickly, there's a lot that the board is trying to do at one time. I know Ty talked about the MOU being signed, which is a great accomplishment for all of you. Can you just speak to just briefly kind of the other things that the board is trying to do, find office space and just stand up an organization, hire people, where that process is?
Yeah, so Ty mentioned like our three strategic objectives, operationalize the relationship with the DoD. We have to build the business. So, I mean, we are in the process of finding a home. We actually need a home to sit and to work out of. So where is that going to be? So we've been looking at areas in the Maryland and Virginia area to set up home there. We're working on what it's going to look like to actually have our own CMMC AB infrastructure, getting us fully up and operationalized like a regular company or independent organization would be. And then we also have our third strategic. We have to, define, develop, and actually implement the CMMC standards. So everything that has to be put in place right now, and this is really where that, operationalize the relationship with DoD is making sure that we have everything in place. We're meeting the timelines that they need. We can actually oversee the accreditation, certification, the approval, the training, the assessment processes that actually have to occur to make this happen. And part of that is, the ability to maintain and keep the CMMC standard current, again, working with DoD on that, because as we all know, the threat changes over time, and this model and our processes that we work with DoD are going to have to be able to adjust to accommodate the ever-changing threat environment that, DoD contractors and the DoD themselves face.
Great, thank you. Ty, Nicole mentioned timeline, and I think that's kind of something important to talk about. Definitely, the DoD and Katie Arrington has really set forth a very aggressive timeline. Do you anticipate the board being able to kind of meet the aggressive timelines that that DoD has set out?
Right now, that's sure our aim point, and that's part of why we need to make sure that we, do the things that Nicole just outlined. That integrated, detailed schedule down at a tactical level will really give us, I think, a well-informed vision of how we get there from here. We don't anticipate at this juncture, any issues associated with that. That's not to say it's going to be easy, but again, leveraging all of the collaboration, teamwork, input from industry, we have a lot to work with at this juncture. So our current view is that there's no reason why we should not be able to, unless something shows itself to the contrary. Our position is we're going to find a way to make it happen.
Great. And I know critical, as you all talked about, to making it happen, Mark, I'm going to come to you now, is that are these working groups? And we did get a question, and I think you mentioned it, but let's just reemphasize it. How do folks volunteer for these working groups? Where do they go to do that?
Sorry, I needed to demute there. To go to the working groups, just go to our website, and there's a quick application form on there for security. Basically, after you fill out some things at the bottom of the page and you select the working groups that you're interested in, it will pop up a message saying, if you're already in our database, there's a button to click, and it'll send you an email, which will give you a direct link to update your profile. Fill out whatever fields you see in there. We've been adding fields as we're gathering more information. And down at the bottom, you'll see the different working groups, and just put a check mark and submit. And we will get back to you generally from the time that we announce a working group till the time the group begins its work. We'll get back to you with some acknowledgement of whether you're going to be a part of the working group or not. If you are not in a working group, and this is really important, we still want to hear from you. So when the working group finishes its work, those people that signed up will get an email with a outline form, bullet list of the deliverables and the conclusions of that working group. We're going to survey you at that point and ask, what did you think? Had you been there, would you have had a different opinion? Do you like what we did? Is there a way that we can tweak it to make it better? You'll get that survey, and so whether you're participating in all of the meetings of the working group or coming in at the end and helping us validate the results, either way, we want to hear from you.
That's great. If somebody has a technical problem with the website with submitting something like that, is there an email address they could reach out to kind of help clear that up?
We do not have a webmaster address, but for right now, use news@cmmcab.org. That's news@cmmcab.org. And that's a shared mailbox. And as we're developing this infrastructure and resources, we'll make sure that any problems get addressed.
Great. Carlton, I'm going to come back to you just for a minute here. I know the board has done a lot of outreach. If folks, what kind of further outreach do you anticipate the board having over the next 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, excellent question. And this is part of our strategic communication strategy. Over the next few months, you're going to see a variety of board members in a variety of forums just like this. And as a quick shout out to you guys, thanks a lot for continuing to shepherd this particular event through. With COVID-19 ongoing, a lot of things are shutting down, but cyber and the activities that are happening in cyberspace are still ongoing. So forcing this conversation to move forward through looking at virtual means was outstanding. So a call out to you guys. So along those lines, part of that plan is every single board member is going to have an opportunity to get out, and you're going to see us in a variety of events to include this. We've had people speaking at organizations like AIA, the Aerospace Industries Association, NDIA, and others. Also through our communications website, that's where our latest and greatest information on what's going on is going to be pushed forward. So we're applying the basic, tell them what you are going to tell them, and then follow through to make sure that they heard and understood your message, because the story that the CMMC AB has got to tell is a very important one. We want to make sure that not only you hear what we have to say, but as Mark pointed out, we want to hear your inputs as well. So we're coming to a station near you. Over.
That's great. I love it. Nicole, I'm going to go off script just a little bit, but I think it's something that is right in your wheelhouse, just based on the positions you've had in the industry and now at the board. Do you see this cybersecurity threat or the cyber threat that's out there in general kind of abating a little bit, or is this kind of a growing storm that we're just starting to kind of meet a little bit more with CMMC?
So the cyber storm has continued to grow as the years have progressed. It has not abated, and it's still not abating. I mean, you know, unfortunately for organizations, they have to be right all the time, but the bad guy only has to be right once. So, you know, what that means is if you don't have the right practices, procedures, and standards in place that you're operating under for an organization, one small error is all it takes for the bad guy to get in, and that's what we continually see over and over and over again. And if you look at the way the CMMC is characterized, it's really taking the best hygiene practices that exist out there in the level 3 and below, which is where most organizations will be, along with the appropriate processes to ensure the right maturity of those hygiene practices to help organizations get to a part that, you know, they are more rapidly defending and preventing the threats from even happening or entering their network. Because that's been one of the biggest challenges that I think organizations face today is you may be doing it, but it's not done in a mature manner. And this is really going to drive organizations to get to that maturity level that we need to see to actually be able to support what's happening out there from a cyber perspective.
Definitely critical. So very helpful to hear. We have just a minute or two left, and Ty, I would like to come back to you to kind of finish up here. One of the concerns I've heard from contractors is the cost of this. What can you tell contractors about, you know, I know there's not a dollar figure about how much this is going to cost right now, but what is the board kind of doing to help ensure, and I know there's a lack of control over some of the costs because you're not the one doing the assessments, but what is the board doing to kind of help contractors kind of think about the cost and how they can account for that?
Well, I think the first thing is to just appreciate and believe that cost is certainly one of the principal elements in the forefront of our mind as we look to implement this CMMC standard. So we're exploring an innovative ecosystem. There's a lot out there to leverage. Looking at automation, we're looking at new ways of thinking about it and approaching the problem set to make sure that we make it as, you know, cost effective and as expensive as possible. That's not to say that we're going to compromise ensuring that it's effective, but we're pulling out all stops to again try to make sure that we provide tools out there that make it the cost, you know, the juice worth the squeeze, if you will, in terms of what it costs organizations and leveraging all of the great work that's already been out there.
Great. Carlton, Ty, Mark, Nicole, really appreciate your time and your efforts here. And I know the community really appreciates everything that you're doing and your openness to taking feedback and working with the community as a whole. So just really terrific, and look forward to hopefully doing future things like this with you all. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dave Gardy in the studio.
Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate it. That was a great panel, and we were able to get, by using some of the phone lines, a lot of ingenuity there to try to do the phone with the computer. You guys did fairly well. So thank you again, all of you, for a great panel on CMMC AB, which is a big topic. That's it for our webcast today. We want to thank our sponsors, NeoSystems, DHD, CyberClan, Holland and Knight, Security University, for putting out, and they were featured during the program. This will be archived up for on-demand webcasting viewing in about approximately 24 to 48 hours. We may take a little longer to try to edit out and may try to record some of the parts where the Zoom conference problems occurred due to the congestion on the East Coast Zoom network. Apologize for that, but kind of out of our control. But it was a great webcast, and We look forward to seeing you again at Cybersecurity TV. Thanks for joining us. Hi, I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios here near Washington, D.C. in preparation for the CMMC Impact on GovCon Part 2. And with us coming via Skype from Washington, D.C. is Mary Beth Borgwing, who is with a company called CyberClan. Mary Beth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, you serve as the Chief Strategy Officer there. Give us an overview. What's the company all about?
Sure. Well, in these very virtual, turbulent times, we're at 110% capacity doing what we do best, which is we are a virtual incident response company. And we are globally located in the UK, Canada, and the US. We have several locations in the US, including Washington, D.C., Austin, Texas, and in California, and in Las Vegas. So we are a growing incident response company, and there is nothing more needed right now than to be able to actually work on ransomware and different kinds of breaches virtually, because nobody wants to actually combine an incident with a physical incident of coronavirus. So we are very, very well situated right now to really help people when they're in need, when their hair's on fire, having in the middle of a data breach.
What are some of the solutions and applications that you offer?
So we offer, obviously, incident response, which is within 15 minutes, we will be up virtually in your network, helping and coaching you through whatever the bad actor or whatever's happening in your network. So we get up and do that pretty successly in, like I said, 15 minutes as soon as the client is approving us to get into their network. So the way ransomware has affected healthcare right now and different, different industries, that is very important, because the longer you wait, the more severe it gets. So then we offer other services to get you back up and running, which is IT restoration and also e-discovery. So a lot of the companies that are working with the cybersecurity maturity model are going to need these services, because they're going to need to prove that they have a plan to make sure that they can handle a data breach. And that's another service that we offer. So we offer planning and risk assessments.
What's the value proposition that distinguishes you from other competitors in the space?
We've been around since 2006. We have a very, very senior team. We believe that what we do is very important, and we want to do good in our space. So a lot of incident response companies are seen as body shops, but we are not, because we are actually, the difference that we have is that we take you from the incident, and then we actually, if you don't already have a managed security service provider, we will continue our efforts and create a security posture for you and take over your security program. So we take you from surgery over to rehab, and we keep you safe, because a lot of companies that are especially people that are probably going through the cybersecurity maturity model, don't have a methodology to put up a security program, and that is key to what's happening within government contractors. So we're able to do both. So we're able to test you to see where you are in your security posture, and we're also able to just take it over and be your partner and be your outsourced security program.
Excellent. So if people want to find out more about CyberClan, where should they go on the web?
So it's pretty easy. It's www.cyberclan.com. And we have a social media page on LinkedIn. And we're actually right now doing a lot of promotion, so people can ask us a lot of security questions through our LinkedIn, one of our LinkedIn programs. So if you have a security question that you want answered, we'll give you 30 minutes of time.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your time today. We've been talking with Mary Beth Borgwing, who is the Chief Strategy Officer with a company called CyberClan, in preparation for the CMMC Impact on GovCon Part 2. Thank you very much for joining us, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Dave.
I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios near Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us.